Morning, everyone, and thank you for being with us. We are at the Tuesday, November 10th, 2020, Montgomery County Council meeting. We're going to begin this morning with some presentations, actually 3 different presentations. The first one is a proclamation recognizing Carbon Monoxide Awareness Month by Councilmember Rice and County Executive Elrich. Councilmember Rice, please.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President, and it's kind of surreal. Because the now county executive was the co-sponsor of this legislation, Bill 2318, that was designed to make sure that we kept families in our communities safe. Just last night, we had a public safety meeting in Montgomery Village, and Chief Goldstein, who was there, did a great job of making sure that folks understood why carbon monoxide alarms are so important. It is the silent killer. I'm not going to take a lot away from Chief Goldstein because I'm sure he has a lot to share with you. But let me just say this, folks, we are approaching the winter months, time in which you will want to use possibly a space heater. A lot of people are talking about using propane heaters for restaurants and things of that nature. The reality is that all of those flames actually create carbon monoxide as a byproduct of them burning that fuel. And that carbon monoxide, if built up, can be incredibly dangerous, including in, unfortunately, the worst case, meaning death. We've seen it here in Montgomery County. We've seen it across the nation. It is so bad that our firefighters actually have carbon monoxide alarms on their bags to let them know if they're going into a situation that there's carbon monoxide in that building. So that's the reality of this problem. Again, as we enter the winter months, I can't remind people enough, whether it's generators, whether they're using space heaters that actually use a flame, your ovens, your fireplaces, all of those kinds of things. And of course, don't forget about your car that could be in a garage or carport. They all emit that carbon monoxide that can be incredibly dangerous. And so I just want to close by saying thank you to our Greater Capital Area Association of Realtors. They were a great partner in this effort in terms of making sure that we push this across the finish line, making sure that we mandate these alarms in our homes, because again, they realize just like we do how important this is in such a big safety matter. And so with that, I'll turn it over to the county executive.
Thank you, Craig. Got to remember this discussion well when we went through this process. Like many things, it takes a while before people, realize how vitally important something is. And I think this is one of those things that was a silent killer. And it didn't kill a lot of people, but it consistently killed people. And I think, the new regulations, requirements for carbon monoxide detectors, all the things that we require now are making homes and safer and businesses safer. But every year as we go into the winter, we know that people are going to be using more fuel in their house, that's for sure. We know that, some households that are struggling particularly wind up using stoves and things as heating devices. And they're at particular risk of not getting those properly ventilated and putting themselves at risk. So we want people to be, hyper aware of the risks of carbon monoxide poisoning. And, the guidance is if you sense it, your alarm goes off, get out. Don't try to figure it out because you don't know whether you'll have enough time to figure it out before you pass out. And so we just urge people to be extra careful, take all the precautions that you can, and enjoy a cozy but safe winter. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. County Executive. I know I want to hear from our fire chief, Chief Goldstein.
Thank you, Mr. Rice, and thank you, County Executive. You both hit key components. Silent killer, as there is no olfactory senses. You can't smell it, taste it. There's nothing that you as a resident or any of our residents can do to detect it. It's not like an electrical smell or an odor of smoke, something burning. There's nothing that you're going to use to detect this, which is why the carbon monoxide alarms are so critical. The circumstance, as the executive said, once the alarm goes off, it's an immediate evacuation, contacting 911. letting the emergency providers come out. Mr. Rice mentioned that we carry a single gas detector on all of our EMS bags because frequently the first indication of a carbon monoxide emergency is somebody complaining of flu-like symptoms, a nausea, vomiting. And in this time of COVID and the fall flu season, the combination and confusion of flu-like symptoms just compounds that problem. But carbon monoxide is present all year round. So when we go in for somebody who's having a medical emergency, who feels nauseated or flu-like, that detector on our EMS bag starts to chirp, that's the only indication we've had that there's a carbon monoxide accumulation in that residence or structure. Now we know how to treat the patient, but we also know that we have a greater emergency than just a medical injury or an illness. So if your house has devices that use a blue or orange flame, natural gas or propane, wood or pellets, or anything that has a blue or orange flame, from your oven to your furnace to your hot water heater to your fireplace, absolutely you need to have a carbon monoxide alarm present in your structure. Mr. Rice also mentioned cars. Cars produce carbon monoxide as a byproduct from their running, and a car left running in an enclosed garage or even adjacent in a carport with a door open can get that carbon monoxide to filter into the structure and create that deadly situation. As we are significantly concerned, we use that phrase silent killer because you're most vulnerable at night when you're asleep, when you have no other senses available. And again, you can't smell this or detect this. So that's why that carbon monoxide alarm needs to be on every level of the residence, and most specifically needs to be outside of the sleeping area, so it can alarm for you and give you that early warning to get out of the structure before you become overcome by the exposure circumstances. Carbon monoxide alarms are as prevalent as smoke alarms. You can actually get a combination smoke and carbon monoxide unit that detects both, and they run roughly within that $15 to $20 range. If you're having a problem, if any one of our folks in the county have a problem and are unable to obtain an alarm, go to 311, go to mcfrs.org, MC-SAFE, reach out to us. We'll come out. We have resources to help them get a carbon monoxide alarm, as with the smoke alarms, because it's been over 40 years that this county had a smoke alarm requirement. They save lives. Carbon monoxide alarms are doing the exact same thing. So, Mr. President, Mr. Executive, and Councilmember Rice, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
If
you.
I could remind all of the council members to please to turn off your cameras during the proclamation so that people can actually see the proclamation. And thank you. Please, Councilmember Rice.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank you, Chief Goldstein. Thank you, County Executive. County Executive, I think you have the proclamation in front of you as well.
I
So
do.
we can alternate? All right, we can alternate. I'll go ahead and start off. Whereas carbon monoxide is a colorless, odorless, poisonous gas, commonly known as the silent killer, that can be fatal for humans and animals and typically leaks from faulty, improperly used, or incorrectly vented fuel-burning appliances, such as furnaces, stoves, water heaters, fireplaces, or generators, and
Whereas more than 150 people die in the United States each year as a result of accidental carbon monoxide poisoning, many who mistake the initial symptoms for the flu, which includes headaches, dizziness, shortness of breath, fatigue, and nausea, and
whereas the County Council unanimously passed Bill 2318, requiring many existing single-unit, two-unit, and townhouse dwellings to install carbon monoxide alarms outside sleeping areas and on every level of the home effective as of July 2019, thus expanding the scope of homes required to install this life-saving device. And
whereas this additional protection is a result of cross-agency collaboration and support from organizations such as the Montgomery County Fire and Rescue Service, Department of Permitting Services, Greater Capital Area Association of Realtors, and housing associations who have committed unique resources to prevent the loss of life from carbon monoxide poisoning.
Now, therefore, do we, Mark Elrich is our county executive, Sydney Katz is our county council president, and myself as county council member of Montgomery County, Maryland, do hereby proclaim November 2020 as Carbon Monoxide Poisoning Awareness Month in Montgomery County, Maryland. The county council and the county executive urge all residents to test their carbon monoxide alarms at least once a year and ensure that their gas appliances are working properly and vented correctly. Signed this 10th day of November in the year 2020 by County Executive Elrich, Council President Katz, and myself.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank
The
you.
next proclamation that we have is one recognizing the heroes of NIH and FDA by Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you, Mr. Council President. I am so honored to be able to share the appreciation and the tremendous appreciation of our county government and our entire community for the tens of thousands of heroes who are working every day at our regulatory agencies and our research agencies and NIH and FDA. We have two proclamations today, and I'm glad the county executive is here. We've invited him to share a few comments before we actually begin to read the proclamations. And I'm very pleased we're joined by two officials from the agencies. We have Dr. Tabak. He's the Principal Deputy Director for the NIH and the Deputy Ethics Counselor for the agency. And we also have Mr. Sigg. James Sigg is the Chief Operating Officer at the FDA. So I just wanted to take a moment today on behalf of a grateful community, both locally and globally. It is such an honor to recognize the outstanding work and dedicated employees of both the NIH and the FDA. We are not only proud that these agencies and their employees are located in Montgomery County, but we understand that as our family members, our friends, and our neighbors, they are a big part of what makes Montgomery County special. We celebrate our role as a community of purpose-driven people, and the amazing employees of NIH and FDA exemplify that spirit. Today's proclamation acknowledges these institutes and agencies' outstanding contribution to the county and the nation. We hear daily about the progress that each is making in solving the COVID-19 pandemic. Sorry, I'm getting a little emotional. Apologize. I'll begin with NIH. NIH employs approximately 20,000 FTEs plus contractors, including research scientists, nurses, patient care staff, scientific review officers, grants management officials, and people serving in any number of administrative functions like budget, acquisitions, legal, human resources, security, etc. NIH is the largest biomedical research agency in the world. Receiving this proclamation for NIH is Dr. Lawrence Tabak, as I mentioned, the Principal Deputy Director of NIH and the Deputy Ethics Counselor for the agency. Mr. County Executive, I'd like to ask you to share some reflections.
Look, I'm really grateful to be here. I'm grateful to live in Montgomery County where we have these institutions. Everybody there has done relatively amazing work in an incredibly difficult climate. Between the COVID and between the politics of the last year, people who do medicine have struggled to be free to just do medicine. But they kept the focus on the work they were doing and have continued to, I think, help bring forward, progress in this field that we will see. We're not going to see it tomorrow, but we will see the results of all this work in the coming year. And we will emerge in a better place. And we'll emerge in a better place because of the dedication of this workforce, their commitment to science, their commitment to getting things right, and the leadership, which has just been unswerving in making sure that these agencies function in a way that serves the best interests of all of the American people. And it's so great to have these in Montgomery County. You bring a wealth of knowledge to this county. You shine a light on this county. We talk about things that make Montgomery County special. the presence of these agencies is one of the things that makes Montgomery County special. Most people would die to have the center of science and health science in their counties. And we are fortunate that these resources are here. We do our best to provide the best environment for the people who work at these institutions, but we know that the work they do is just beyond our ability to reward in any normal way. When I think about the people I've met who actually do the scientific work, none of them are going to get rich for it. None of them are going to win a Nobel Prize for it. But they're out there every day trying to make sure that they can do things that change the course of health in this country and in the world. So I'm really appreciative of their dedication. I'm appreciative of being in the center of life science industries in general, where the work at NIH and FDA can be amplified, and where you've got the people, the creators working with, the regulatory folks and researchers, and it's just it's a great place to be. I got to say, at this moment in history, it is a wonderful place to be, to see this assembled and operating here in the county. So thank you very much for everything you do. Please let all the folks who work in your agencies know how much we appreciate what they do. Thank you.
Thank you. So I will read the proclamation and then introduce Dr. Tabak. Whereas the National Institutes of Health, NIH, is an agency within the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and is headquartered in Montgomery County. The county is proud of the work and dedicated efforts of the NIH staff towards the mission of improving human health during the COVID-19 public health emergency. And whereas NIH has demonstrated its commitment to support the critical research required to develop and improve vaccines, treatments, and testing, while safeguarding the tens of thousands of Marylanders who work there. The management and implementation of all available resources towards these efforts have been exemplary and performed with speed and integrity. And whereas NIH scientists acted swiftly to improve our state of knowledge of COVID-19 and develop an mRNA-based vaccine candidate within weeks of knowing the genomic sequence. NIH has supported the invention of rapid and point-of-care COVID-19 testing technologies. The NIH has also been a leader in public and private partnerships, such as the Accelerating COVID-19 Therapeutics and Interventions and Vaccines and Operation Warp Speed, to develop groundbreaking approaches to speed the development of candidate vaccines, therapeutics, and new diagnostic tests. And whereas leading scientists from NIH gave the residents of Montgomery County and the country timely and accurate information about the virus so individuals could make decisions to protect themselves and their families, and policymakers could react on the basis of evidence. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Montgomery County Council of Montgomery County, Maryland, honors the dedicated men and women of the National Institutes of Health for their efforts to combat the global pandemic of 2020, presented on this 10th day of November in 2020. Thank you. Now, I would like to introduce, to receive our proclamation, Dr. Tabak is as I mentioned, the Principal Deputy Director at NIH, and prior to that role, he was the Director of the National Institute of Dental and Craniofacial Research from 2000 to 2010. He has provided leadership for numerous trans-NIH activities, including the NIH Roadmap effort to support team science, the NIH Directors Initiative to enhance peer review, NIH's American Recovery and Reinvestment Act implementation, the NIH Initiative to enhance rigor and reproducibility in research, and the NIH-wide strategic plan. He co-chaired working groups of the Advisory Committee to the Director of NIH on the diversity of the biomedical research workforce, the long-term intramural research program, and currently is co-chair of both the Next Generation Researchers Initiative and High Risk, High Reward research working groups. Prior to joining NIH, Dr. Tabak was the Senior Associate Dean for Research and Professor of Dentistry and Biochemistry and Biophysics in the School of Medicine and Dentistry at the University of Rochester in New York. He's a former NIH merit recipient, and his major research focus has been on the structure, biosynthesis, and function of glycoproteins. He continues work in this area, maintaining an active research laboratory within the NIH intramural program, in addition to his administrative duties, and he's an elected member of the National Academy of Medicine. So, Mr. Lawrence Dr. Lawrence Tabak. Thank you.
Well, thank you and good morning. I greatly appreciate the invitation today and thank you for recognizing the dedication and hard work of the staff of the NIH. As the Principal Deputy Director of the agency, I have seen firsthand the ingenuity and commitment to excellence exhibited by everyone at NIH, from the hospital cafeteria to the research labs, from the power plant to the intensive care unit. I've never been as proud of NIH as I have been watching how my agency has risen to the challenge of the COVID-19 global pandemic. With the urgent need for medical interventions and new diagnostic tests, shutting down was never an option. And so from the very beginning, we have had three intersecting goals: to develop vaccines and therapies with all possible speed, to develop the next generation of tests to detect SARS-CoV-2, and to keep our employees safe and healthy. I'm pleased to report that so far we've been successful. Under the leadership of Drs. Francis Collins, Tony Fauci, Gary Gibbons, Chris Austin, and Bruce Tromberg, as well as others, we have convened the leading minds across government, the global pharmaceutical industry, academia, and foundations to ensure that effort was not duplicative and that no evidence was missed. NIH research proved the efficacy of remdesivir, which is now standard of care, and has facilitated the entry of 4 vaccine candidates into phase 3 clinical trials. And we fully expect to get efficacy data from the 2 leading candidates before the end of the calendar year. A number of new point-of-care tests for the virus have now been developed, adding millions of tests to our capacity to help keep people from spreading the virus. And while doing this critical work, the COVID-19 test positivity rate amongst our staff has consistently been lower than our surrounding communities across all of our campuses nationwide. And although we have research facilities in Montana and North Carolina and Phoenix, we are very, very proud to have our headquarters and the majority of our operations here in Montgomery County. Your recognition today will mean a great deal to the thousands of NIHers who call Montgomery County home. Thank you very much for your support.
Thank you, Dr. Tabak. I'm so glad you're here. And again, we're so grateful for the daily work of the heroes of your agency. I'll now read the proclamation for the FDA. We are joined by Mr. Siggs. Whereas the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA, is an agency within the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, with its headquarters campus located in Montgomery County. And the county is proud of the work and dedicated efforts that the staff of FDA have performed during the COVID-19 public health emergency. And whereas the COVID-19 pandemic has created significant new challenges, and the FDA has demonstrated its commitment to use all available resources towards response efforts, and the staff have been exemplary and performed with speed, integrity, and the assurance of safety to address this evolving emergency. And whereas the FDA has facilitated the development of tests to diagnose infections and has provided exemplary oversight of test accuracy and reliability, has taken numerous actions to help increase supplies of medical equipment and personal protective equipment needed to fight COVID-19 and protect healthcare workers, has facilitated the development and availability of other medical devices and therapeutics to combat COVID-19, and has provided exemplary oversight and regulation of vaccine quality, effectiveness, and safety, helping to facilitate the timely development of COVID-19 vaccines. And whereas the FDA has continued to play a critical role in both accelerating development of and enabling access to medical countermeasures to treat and prevent COVID-19 by educating, collaborating, and communicating with clinicians, consumers, healthcare organizations, and other partners across the U.S., as well as preventing fraudulent COVID-19 products, including ineffective diagnostics, treatments, and PPE from entering the country at our nation's port of entry. Now Therefore, be it resolved that the County Council of Montgomery County, Maryland, hereby honors the dedicated staff of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, presented on this 10th day of November, signed by Council President Sidney Katz and myself. And to accept the proclamation, I am grateful that we are joined by Mr. James Sigg. He's the Food and Drug Administration Chief Operating Officer, the position he has held previously from January to April of 2012. In this role, he maintains oversight of FDA's information technology, ethics, equal employment opportunity, human resources, safety and security, facilities, acquisition, and financial management programs for the agency worldwide. Mr. Sigg has been with the FDA for 24 years, most recently serving as the Associate Director for Management, Executive Officer, and Director of the Office of Management in the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research, CBER, since 2008. In these roles, he managed CBER's annual budget of $300 million and provided executive leadership in the areas of workforce development, budget formulation and execution, resource management, program planning and evaluation, and other administrative services that support the public health mission. Mr. Sigg advised CBER's director and senior executives on center-wide administrative functions, including financial management, human resources, and procurement. Under his leadership, he strategically managed the move of over 1,100 employees and contractors, 70 laboratories, and approximately 14,000 research animals from 8 locations to the White Oak FDA campus with no disruption to critical regulatory administrative operations. Throughout his tenure at FDA, Mr. Sigg has held various positions within CBER, including Contract Liaison Officer, Special Assistant to the Director of the Office of Management, and Deputy Director of the Office of Management. He earned a BS in Business Management from St. Francis College, and has been the recipient of 3 Commissioner's Special Citation Awards for his contributions in leading improvements to human resources efforts, and he received the FDA Award of Merit in 2013 for his extraordinary leadership in managing fiscal responsibilities and staffing. Mr. Sigg.
Thank you, Councilman Raymer. Good morning. My name is Jim Sigg, and I serve as the Deputy Commissioner for Operations and Chief Operating Officer at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. I'm honored to be here today to accept this proclamation on behalf of the thousands of dedicated public health professionals at FDA. And I want to thank Councilman Raymer and the entire county council for their recognition. As this council has recognized, FDA employees are a dedicated group of civil servants who have worked tirelessly to fight the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Since the beginning of the pandemic, FDA has been working to facilitate the development and availability of medical products and equipment for use by patients, physicians, and healthcare systems as expeditiously and safely as possible. From the first emergency use authorization for our diagnostic testing to the recent approval of remdesivir for certain COVID-19 patients. I cannot emphasize enough the importance of collaborative partnerships between federal, state, and local officials to protect the public health, especially now. Much of the work to combat COVID-19 would not be possible without your dedicated efforts at the county level, and we look forward to continuing to work with all of you on COVID-19 and other public health issues. Many of the FDA staff this proclamation recognizes not only work at our White Oak campus and other locations in Montgomery County, but many are also residents of the county. As a result, the steps that the state of Maryland and Montgomery County have taken to control the spread take on an added significance in protecting the health of all Americans, as FDA staff are on the front lines in the nationwide response to the pandemic. We appreciate the steps Montgomery County has taken to control the spread in the immediate community. At FDA, we have taken necessary steps to protect the health and well-being of our staff by implementing policies and practices that require wearing face coverings and social distancing, and continue to offer our staff the opportunity for maximum telework. I witness every day the tireless effort being put forth by FDA employees in our offices, laboratories, and those who are working remotely to respond to this pandemic, as well as by FDA employees who support them with safe facilities, effective information technology, personal security, and other critical support services to achieve this FDA mission. Finally, I would like to emphasize FDA's appreciation for the relationship we have with Montgomery County as we work cooperatively to support ongoing improvements to the eastern portion of the county and transportation management initiatives, such as the new bus rapid transit system on the US 29 corridor, a project vital to FDA commuters. Once again, on behalf of all FDA staff, thank you for this recognition.
Thank you, Mr. Sigg. Really appreciate your work and the work of everyone at FDA. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. And the final proclamation this morning is the proclamation celebrating Veterans Day by myself and County Executive Elrich. County Executive Elrich, would you like to say a few words?
Sure. So this is the annual celebration. Do you have me?
Yeah, you're there.
Okay, sorry. So this is our annual celebration of Veterans Day, and it's the 102nd anniversary of the armistice, which for most of us who aren't old enough to remember what that was for the end of World War I. It is an understatement to say that many folks who go into the military, go in under very difficult circumstances, are asked to do what is only dangerous work that puts themselves in the line of fire and puts their lives at risk. And yet they do this job, and they do this unwaveringly. They understand what their role is, and they do this with a great amount of pride. And many times when they come home, other than, the celebrations like, Veterans Day, they often don't get the same kind of treatment, or the kind of treatment you would expect from people who would put their lives on the line for their country. And they struggle with access to health care. They've struggled with recognition of consequences of having been in contact. They struggle with PTSD. They bring back consequences of their service to this country. I know in Montgomery County, we have our own Veterans Affairs Office. We've worked with the federal government to extend services to veterans here. We are acutely aware, and I know Ike took the lead on this along with Mike Subin, to make sure the county provided a better home and a better responsiveness to the needs of veterans. So this proclamation recognizes their service to the country. It recognizes their dedication and their willingness to make the ultimate sacrifice if they were called on to do that, if in their minds it meant that they were making this country safe. So I just want to express my sincere appreciation of their dedication and commitment, and hope that Montgomery County continues to provide and expand the kind of services that provide people what I believe they deserve for the service they provided the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. County Executive. It was well said. I too, and I'm going to call on Wayne Miller, the chair of the Montgomery County Commission on Veterans Affairs, who's going to be accepting the proclamation. But I just wanted to say that, so many times we take for granted many things in the United States, but especially in Montgomery County. We take for granted that everything that we have should just be there. And of course, that's not correct. I mean, just the fact that we're able to have a discussion is because someone fought for the freedom of speech. The fact that we had an election last week is because someone thought that we should have that freedom as well. The democracy is something that we take for granted in the United States, but I can tell you there are many countries that do not have that same form of freedom. And the reason we have it is because someone risked their lives to make certain that each of us will continue to have that wonderful thing that we don't always think about. And so with that, and the proclamation says so much, and we're going to get to that in just 2 seconds. But Mr. Miller, if you would please say a few words. You're on mute. There, you were off mute for a second. You're still on mute. Try it one more time, please. There you go.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to thank the county exec and the county council. It is a true honor for me to accept this proclamation on behalf of all the veterans, their families, and the Montgomery County Commission on Veterans Affairs. During these times of COVID, veterans may face many challenges. Montgomery County cares about you. We want to let you know there is help for these challenges. The Silver Spring Vet Center, Department of Veterans Affairs, the Montgomery County Community-Based Outreach Clinic, Department of Veterans Affairs, and several other organizations are there for you. There are services such as mental and physical wellness, suicide prevention. There's a pledge that we can all sign to help with suicide prevention, recreational programs, and housing resources. Montgomery County Commission on Veterans Affairs worked with the dedication of a Vietnam Veterans Memorial on Memorial Plaza, the accessible boat launch at Seneca Creek, Riley Lock, and also our home front public broadcasting that we deal with veterans' concerns. And on the opening of the VA's community-based outreach clinic in Gaithersburg. I'd like to say for myself and all the Marine Corps out there, today is our birthday, 245th. I'm a severely combat wounded Vietnam veteran myself, and I am a Marine. And also I'd like to say Happy Veterans Day. God bless America. And again, thank you so much for the proclamation.
Thank you. And with that, Mr. County Executive, would you like to start off the proclamation?
I would. Let me grab it again because it disappeared under the other proclamation.
All right.
I know it's come back here. Proclamation. This is what happens when you have too many windows open on the screen.
Well, we understand how that works as well.
Bear with me here.
Okay.
That's not it. I clicked on, there it is. Okay. Whereas this year, Veterans Day marks the 102nd anniversary of the armistice, and we again pay tribute to the generations upon generations of Montgomery County residents who have served with courage and loyalty in every major United States military conflict since 1776. And
you just froze.
I froze?
Yeah, do it again, please.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Whereas this year, Veterans Day marks the 102nd anniversary of the armistice, and we again pay tribute to the generations upon generations of Montgomery County residents who have served with courage and loyalty in every major United States military conflict since 1776. And
whereas we will never be able to repay the debt we owe the brave men and women who have served in the uniformed services of the United States, and we recognize the military service of those who have served in the armed forces. And
whereas the Grateful County recognizes that service members may have a challenging transition to civilian life, and we, along with the Commission on Veterans Affairs, seek to promote mental health and physical wellness by supporting greater seamless access to mental health programs, suicide prevention, recreational programs, and housing resources for service members and their families. And
whereas we commend the work of the Commission on Veterans Affairs for the work to have a Vietnam Veterans Memorial dedicated on Memorial Plaza, the establishment of an accessible launch at Seneca Creek at Raleigh's Lock, and also having the Washington, D.C. VA Medical Center establish a community-based outpatient clinic in Gaithersburg, Maryland, where veterans now have access to quality primary health care closer to home. Now, therefore, do we, Mark Elrich as County Executive and Sidney Katz as County Council President of the Montgomery County, Maryland, do hereby proclaim November 11, 2020 as Veterans Day in Montgomery County, Maryland. We pay tribute to those who have ever worn the uniform, and we call upon all residents to recognize the sacrifice and pay tribute to our thousands of county residents who are veterans and their families today and every day. And it's signed by County Executive Elrich and by me on today. Thank you very much, Mr. Miller, and thank you and all veterans for everything that you are doing each and every day. Thank you very much.
thank you all.
And with that, we're going to move on to our regular agenda. Connie, Madam Clerk, do we have any announcements, changes to the agenda, or petitions?
Yes, good morning, Council President and Council members. On addendum number 2, there was a time change to 9 o'clock for the presentations. There's a time change at 9:20 to general business, a time change to the consent calendar to 9:25. Also added to the consent calendar is 3B, Introduction Supplemental Appropriation number 13-S21-CMCG-5 to the county government's FY21 capital budget and amendment to the FY21-26 capital improvements program, Department of Health and Human Services, $1 million for emergency homeless shelter, number P602103, source of funds, GO bonds. Public hearing action is scheduled for 12/1/20 at 1:30 p.m. Added to the agenda is 3.5, 9:45 briefing, Inspector General report, Department of Permitting Services report and investigation. DPS inspectors were overpaid COVID differential pay. Also postponed number 4A at 10:45, the council sitting as the Board of Health. The annual meeting with the Commission on Health will be rescheduled for a future date. Added at 11:30, 4D, Introduction, Board of Health Regulation to adopt Executive Order 122-20 AM, COVID-19 Local Order, amending and restating order dated September 29, 2020. Also added, public hearing, Board of Health Regulation to adopt an Executive Order 122-20 AM, COVID-19 Local Order, amending and restating order dated September 29, 2020. Added, 4.5, Introduction Action, Resolution to approve an Executive Order 122-20 AM, COVID-19 Local Order, amending and restating order dated September 29, 2020 as the County Council. Added, 4E, Action, Resolution to adopt an Executive Order 122-20 AM, COVID-19 Local Order, amending and restating order dated September 29, 2020 as a Board of Health regulation. Number 7 at 1:30, public hearing, resolution to amend development impact tax rates for transportation and public school improvements. Added, action is tentatively scheduled for 11/16/20. There is also one announcement. Under general business, the council is seeking applications for a vacancy on the county's Charter Review Commission. The deadline to apply is Wednesday, November 25th, 2020 at 5 p.m. In addition, there is one petition. The council has received a petition from the residents of Montgomery County opposing Bill 29-20, Taxation, Payments in lieu of Taxes, WMATA property established. That is all, Council President.
Thank you very much. The minutes have been distributed for September 15th, September 22nd, September 29th, and October 1st, 2020. Unless there are any corrections, they will be approved as received. The next item that we have on the calendar is the consent calendar. And since we're running later than as this was suggested on our agenda, and we're slated to have a briefing now, what I'm going to do, if it meets with the council's approval, I'm going to defer the consent agenda until after Dr. Gales and we meet as the Board of Health, and then come back to it. So before a recess, so that we can have people who are here for those hearings and briefing receive those now. Is that all right with the council? I see nobody jumping up and down. So we are going to go to 3.5, which is the briefing for the Inspector General report, the Department of Permitting Services report and investigation. DPS inspectors were overpaid COVID differential pay. And with that, I'm going to ask Megan Lamarzi to please begin the statement.
Good morning.
Good morning.
There we are. Good morning, Council President Katz, Council Vice President Hucker, members of the County Council. It's very nice to see all of you. Thank you very much for inviting me here this morning to present the findings of a recent report from my office regarding the overpayment of COVID differential pay in the Department of Permitting Services. If I could for just a minute, I'd like to begin by noting that this is the second report in a row that my office has issued, which originated from a report to our fraud hotline. Fraud hotlines are instrumental in an Inspector General's ability to deter and detect fraud, waste, and abuse in government programs. Every day, members of my staff receive phone calls and emails from people who are concerned that certain activities may not be quite right. They have questions and are very engaged in encouraging the integrity of our county government. I really want to thank all of the county employees, the residents, our neighbors who have contacted my office to report questionable practices and procedures and to be champions of good, equitable government. As detailed in the report that I submitted and was published on Friday, in May of this year, my office received 2 separate complaints alleging that Department of Permitting Services inspectors were claiming 40 hours of front-facing COVID differential pay, even though they were not performing that type of work all 8 hours of every day that they were working. Our investigation examined 3 pay periods covering March 29th through May 9th of this year. We began by trying to analyze DPS inspection data using public sources such as Data Montgomery and the DPS website. However, we quickly found that the data simply did not match and seemed to show very large differentials in the number of inspections that were conducted in 2019 during the same period as were being conducted in 2020. We continued to do an analysis and requested information directly from DPS, which also did not match any of the previous data sets we had reviewed. Through our investigation, we learned that in order to determine the numbers and types and frequency of inspections that are performed, one would have to go and gather that information from several different sources and aggregate it manually. Persons that we interviewed at DPS agreed that the data is not accurately tracked or captured, which is a concern, obviously, in regards to what we were looking at here, but also raises concerns about how services are provided and whether there may be other inefficiencies in DPS. During the course of the investigation, we determined that approximately half of the inspectors consistently claimed 80 hours of front-facing time for each pay period. We interviewed the DPS director, the former acting DPS director, DPS division chiefs, and the investigation revealed that in April of 2020, the acting director of DPS and 4 of the 5 division chiefs collectively decided to allow inspectors to claim front-facing differential pay for their entire workday, contrary to county policy or guidance. There was 1 division chief who was not part of that agreement. And so not all inspectors were given this advantage. Not all chiefs chose to misapply the pay differential. We were told that the decision was made to have this policy applied in this manner so as to not, quote, nickel and dime the inspectors. And I will note that 2 different division chiefs used that exact phrase. Another called it nitpicking the inspectors on their timekeeping practices. All of the division chiefs who had misapplied policy told us the exact same thing. It was a deliberate misapplication of the pay differential. County guidance is sent to all department directors and managers on a bi-weekly basis. Right before the end of our pay periods, we all receive the guidance, and it clearly notes that the $10 differential for front-facing work as applied to employees such as the inspectors was to be recorded hourly. So if you went and did an inspection and it took 3 hours of the day, and then you went back home and you were filling out reports and reviewing plans, those other 5 hours of your day would be telework. Again, I want to be clear, we were unable to fully calculate the cost of the overpayments because of the incomplete data that is maintained by DPS. We don't know how many inspections were really done. We don't know the kinds of inspections. There were instances where inspections were being performed using video on your cell phone, for example. And we certainly don't know the duration of the inspections. After our first interview with the director of DPS in late August, she advised her staff that inspectors should no longer claim the front-facing differential across the board for all 80 hours worked in a pay period. We later compared the front-facing claims then for the pay period of September 13th through 26th with the earlier periods that we had analyzed. We saw a 90% decline in the number of employees claiming 80 hours of front-facing in a pay period. It was a decrease of 1,456 hours claimed, which was a savings of $14,560 in one pay period. Lastly, the report does note that we have received varied concerns, questions regarding the approval and utilization of differential pay in other parts of the county. We continue to evaluate each complaint that is received to determine appropriate next steps. We did look at inspection type work because this was a narrow investigation. It was an investigation based on a complaint about the inspectors. So we looked at where else in county government inspection type work is done. In the report, we note DHCA has also categorized all inspection work as front-facing. And based upon our findings here, it may be that similar to the DPS decision to misapply policy, there may be a misapplication occurring elsewhere in county government. Based upon these findings, we presented 4 recommendations to the administration, all of which the CAO has concurred with. Those include a recommendation for a full review of DPS COVID differential pay claims and reimbursement for undeserved differential pay. And we recommend a review of all of the differential pay claims because, again, our investigation did look at employees who claimed the full 80 hours of front-facing in a pay period. So it's possible an employee may have claimed in a pay period 72 hours of front-facing and had 8 hours of annual pay, for example. So that is why we have recommended that the department do a deeper look because, again, our analysis only captured a narrow window. Our second recommendation was for a review of all county departments' differential pay expenditures to ensure that they have complied with policy. And we again suggest that the county seek reimbursement of any undeserved payouts. It may be a perhaps unique scenario that was in DPS, but again, in looking at the inspections type work, there is room for error and there may have been other instances and is the root of our recommendation. We also recommended the CAO not seek reimbursement from the federal government for pay differential expenses until those have been verified for compliance with policy. And this would, of course, be to ensure that any reimbursement requests are for accurately billed and charged expenses. And lastly, we certainly hope that DPS and recommend DPS improve their inspection data. Moving forward, my office will continue to monitor the corrective actions that have been proposed and will be taken by the administration to remediate these issues. A best practice for any Office of Inspector General is to routinely perform follow-up reviews, audits, and inspections to determine if changes put in place have adequately addressed previously uncovered deficiencies. And I am happy to take any other questions you may have. I would very much like to thank the director at DPS who was incredibly responsive to our requests. She met with my staff on more than one occasion, and we really did appreciate her cooperation.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lamorzi. Mr. Madaleno.
Sorry, I was having a bit of an unmute issue. Thank you very much, Council President Katz, Council Vice President Hucker, and members of the council. Thank you for this opportunity to respond to the very serious allegations raised by the Inspector General, and I want to thank Ms. Lamarzi for her continued work on behalf of the county government. The county executive and I both find the situation that was allowed to go on in the Department of Permitting Services totally unacceptable, and we are taking immediate actions to fix this situation. We are actively looking to understand exactly what happened in DPS, what needs to be addressed about this incident, including seeking the repayment of any wages that were paid inappropriately, whether a similar practice happened in any other department, and how to improve and learn from this troubling incident. I personally want to apologize to all of you if my written response to the IG report left any doubt as to the seriousness with which we take these findings. The county executive and I have directed the staff of the county to thoroughly review what happened in DPS and to determine whether other problems exist elsewhere in our government. We have already conducted a preliminary review and spoken with department leadership in several larger departments. Between myself, Ms. Kassiri, Mr. Brogley, we have interviewed leadership in transportation, environmental protection, housing and community affairs, animal services, and a number of other departments to ensure that similar mistakes were not made by those departments. We have confirmed that they understood the policies as they were initially crafted in March. They communicated those policies to their management teams. And right now we believe those departments acted consistent with the county policies that were laid out when the pay differential was instituted. Although we have found no specific allegations or information that the incident that occurred in permitting services has occurred in other departments, I have directed, the county executive has directed the internal audit team to investigate this matter thoroughly. The county's internal auditor is leading a team to review all the non-public safety departments to ensure that they applied the policies correctly. We believe the review will be complete by the end of November. To ensure that there is no misunderstanding of county policies, we also put out a reminder to all departments on how the differential pay should be handled and directed all departments to remind their employees who are identified as performing duties eligible for the pay differential of the restrictions of when hours worked are eligible for the differential and the need for their managers to review how time is being recorded to ensure compliance with county policies. We are reviewing appropriate remedies. Some actions have already been taken, although at this point it is not appropriate for me to comment on them, and we are continuing to determine what else can and should be done. The Inspector General has identified some reporting inconsistencies, technical issues, which our DPS director had been working on to address even before the report was issued. You know that improving the reporting out of the Department of Permitting Services was a priority for the county executive. It's one of the things that Ms. Padilla is working on in her leadership of the department so that we never run into the technical problem that the Inspector General raised at the beginning, which is the unable to match the inspections to our various reports to improve the data set, our synchronization with the open data platform. So all of that work is going on and was going on independent of this situation. I want to thank our many county employees who were willing to work at the height of the pandemic in an environment of fear and uncertainty to deliver county services. Our nurses, paramedics, bus drivers, police officers, firefighters, correctional officers, social workers, building inspectors, and many others have reported to work every day to protect the health and safety of our community. This concerning event in no way lessens the importance of their work and the county executive and my deep appreciation of what they have been doing and continue to do. In fact, it is very frustrating to think that the efforts of so many county employees have been called into question because of what happened in permitting services and the situation with roughly 70 to 75 inspectors who, in the end, as we're still trying to figure out the exact amount of money, dealing with recognizing some of the same data issues that Ms. Lamarzi brought up in her presentation. So you're going to hear today from a number of different executive staff as to what we've done already, what is happening within permitting services, and what is happening elsewhere across the county. We never, from day one, intended the front-facing pay to cover any work that was not front-facing. The directives to every department were very clear about the hours where an employee would be eligible for front-facing and would not. It was part of our negotiations with our labor partners at the table when we worked through our pay differential. So there was understanding on both sides, which is why it is so disappointing that the prior leadership of the Department of Permitting Services did not follow proper procedure and did not provide clear and appropriate guidance to their employees as to how to handle this situation. And we will do our best to recoup that money. We are actively looking at whether or not we need to find outside assistance in order to do it. We are very confident about all of our public safety units, and we'll be moving forward. And you'll hear either during this presentation or the next presentation about our continued work in seeking reimbursement from FEMA and moving forward with all of our public safety units for reimbursement, and the excellent work that the FARS team led by Dave Gottesman has done to assemble all of this information so that we can submit it in a timely fashion to the federal government.
Thank you, Mr. Madaleno. I'm going to actually call on my colleagues to ask questions, and if there's questions of the various departments, that they can ask them directly. But let me just say up front that we all sincerely appreciate everyone's efforts and the people that are the employees that were working on the front lines, and every other employee for everything that they've done. But I think it should be very clear in my case that I believe there needs to be an independent investigation. I do not believe this should be internal. I believe there should be an independent investigation so that we can make certain that of all the concerns that have been discussed by Ms. Lamarzi and by others are properly addressed. And with that, I'm going to turn to Ms. Navarro, Councilmember Navarro, to please lead us off with her questions.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to make a statement and then a question. As Chair of the Government Operations and Fiscal Policy Committee, I just want to say that I thank Inspector General Megan Lamarzi and her team for this report. Found that several employees of the Department of Permitting Services improperly received differential pay meant for workers exposed to the coronavirus as a result of their work. As Inspector General Lamarzi stated, with the COVID-19 emergency, the county executive instituted differential pay for county employees required to work on site. $10 front-facing differential pay is for work with the public, and $3 an hour for back office differential pay, which is for work that cannot be performed by telework and does not involve regular physical interaction with the public. The Office of the Inspector General received those complaints of the Department of Permitting Services. DPS management allowed its inspectors to receive $10 an hour for front-facing differential pay, not only for hours that were on site, but also for hours that they were working at home or otherwise not exposed to the public. The OIG investigation determined that DPS employees were obtaining a benefit to which they were not entitled. This is concerning because the misapplication of policy is leading to improper payments and further adding to the county's COVID-19 debt burden. As of September 26, 2020, the county spent more than $49 million on COVID-19 differential pay across all departments for all the work that our amazing front-facing staff has been doing since the pandemic. A little over a month ago, the OIG also released a report that found data breaches on county government systems that exposed sensitive information belonging to vulnerable minors. Again, as chair of the Government Operations and Fiscal Policy Committee, I want to express my appreciation for the work of the Inspector General. For a little added context, last year, the GO Committee made it a priority to ensure that the Office of the Inspector General would have the resources it needs to conduct needed audits and investigations to help guide internal reforms. Only by empowering our oversight mechanism can we ensure that we are proactively closing potential routes of abuse. Working together as a team, we crafted and ensured the enactment of legislation that gave added authority to the Office of the Inspector General and provided additional resources to ensure that there's proactive fiscal oversight of taxpayers' dollars. Our work is bearing fruit, and I believe our county is better off because of this added oversight. And I want to thank my GO committee colleagues, especially Councilmember Friedson, who has been working really hard on making sure that we are able to achieve all of these enhancements. I also want to say that during our budget process, we as a council decided to adopt a continuity of operations budget. And one of the things that we kept tracking was specifically the expenses associated with the pay differential, because we wanted to make sure that whatever debt we were incurring or whatever expenditures we were incurring, that we could actually afford, given the fact that this fiscal situation with the pandemic continues to be somewhat uncertain. As a matter of fact, we also now have required weekly reports to ensure that we're tracking our CARES Relief Act funding, and again, questions regarding the trajectory of this expenditure regarding the pay differential has been front and center in our discussions. So as some of you have already stated, there are several questions stemming from this investigation and also the September 24th report on data breaches. I am pleased that the Chief Administrative Officer has concurred with the OIG's 4 recommendations. But beyond that, I want to be assured that concrete action will be immediately taken to ensure that the misapplied funds are returned, that this is not a county-wide issue, and that structures and processes are revamped to ensure that this does not happen again. I also have to say that, I do wish that the county executive would have stayed for this important discussion. I know he was here for the proclamations, because these are important issues that I think both the county executive and the county council should have an opportunity to discuss. The GO committee is going to continue to work with the IG and the CAO moving forward to address these reports and ensure that the OIG recommendations are addressed fairly and promptly. In terms of questions, some of you have, I think, Mr. President, you've mentioned some of them. I do also believe that we need an independent review and audit of all the funds dispersed so far to ensure fidelity to their purpose. So definitely want to hear about that particular issue. Of course, the OIG has recommended that the county government not seek federal reimbursement for these differential expenditures until there's assurance that the funds were not misspent. And the response indicates that they will go ahead, the county administration will go ahead and adjust later. Like to understand what may be the legal implications for the strategy and whether this is something that we need to discuss, in a different setting. But I think it is important to understand where are we with this, and also want to make sure that we're not going to miss the December deadline in terms of this reimbursement. So these are some of my questions. I believe that I'm sure my colleagues have many others, but with that, Mr. President, I'd like to turn it over to you and then hear specifically regarding this independent review of the audit and also plans for seeking the federal reimbursement. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilmember Friedson, and I think what we can do is go through the questions from the council members and the statements, and then get back to the actual explanations, because I know there's going to be overlap in many, many cases. Councilmember Friedson, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you to the Government Operations Fiscal Policy Chair. If we want residents who we serve and the county employees who are actually putting their health and safety on the line during this crisis to trust our county government, we must address this egregious breach of trust and fix this mess right now. No excuses, no delays. One, an outside review, as you heard from my colleagues, of COVID differential pay across all county departments to ensure that everybody has claimed and is claiming differential pay appropriate and according to county policy. Two, every single taxpayer dollar that was wrongfully paid out must be returned immediately. That is not negotiable. It must happen, and it must happen immediately. Three, there must be accountability. There must be an acknowledgement of what this egregious act has done to the public's trust in our county government. Those in DPS who, according to the OIG report, quote, collectively decided to take advantage of a pandemic to defraud taxpayers and disparage the reputations of every single honest, hardworking county employee must be held responsible. And any response from this county government without those three things falls woefully short of what's required in this moment. With that said, I have a number of questions. This is for Mr. Madaleno. What date did you and the county executive learn of this issue? And what specifically did you and the county executive do in response to it at that time?
I don't mean to be difficult, Council Member President Katz. I didn't know if you wanted to go through everything.
If the council member asks you a question, please respond.
All right. I learned of it when the Inspector General submitted the report on October 29th.
So you weren't informed as the investigation was ongoing with conversations with your administration?
I was not aware of this situation before then. I would say that was in the middle of the transition from the prior CAO to me.
Okay, and the prior CEO didn't let you know that there was an active Inspector General investigation that had found alleged fraud in one of your departments?
If he knew of it, I don't believe so. I mean, I don't believe he knew of it. I don't believe Miss Lamarzi told him or me of it.
Okay. Why was the council not informed when you were informed?
What? Because there is a process. My understanding of this process is Ms. Lamarzi provides us with the findings of her report and asks that they remain confidential until she releases them.
Why was the decision made not to put anybody responsible for this on administrative leave?
Because we've been working with the leadership of the department, and I am not at liberty. I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm not trying to be evasive. As you know, personnel actions are privileged. We are taking steps and have taken steps to address this breach in trust.
Okay, but it was learned as the investigation was ongoing, members of your administration were told that this was happening, which began in August. That was when the first contact with somebody in the executive branch who wasn't directly involved in this action. Was there any decision at that point to take any direct actions to address the situation besides simply stopping the misappropriation of funds, the misspending of funds from occurring in August that we heard that the—
Councilmember Friesen, may I?
Please.
In August, actually, Ms. Lamarzi did mention to me, I wasn't aware of the depth of the issue, but later on when I've learned what DPS director, the action she took, but all along, our inputs that we got, and actually I did talk to our DPS director, Ms. Paduim. Her investigation did not reveal that there was a deliberate misapplication. It was still, since August, I had numerous meetings with Mitra, DPS director. Therefore, this was actually, in our assessment, it wasn't a deliberate misappropriation, misapplication of the rule. It was basically, I hate to say, a bunch of managers not paying attention, not being focused, and there were a lot of explanation of why this mistake happened, which I would say personally is not acceptable But the reason no extreme personal action, as you just mentioned, putting someone on admin leave happened because this was a mistake. However, Ms. Peduim did, as a director, she did take some actions, but these are kind of, I guess, disciplinary action that cannot be discussed in public. But that is the reason that in our view, it was egregious mistake. It was not a deliberate action knowingly trying to deviate from the policy and guidance that was given from the second floor.
Was that the administration's position when you first heard from the OIG in August, or is that still the administration's position that this was a mistake? Because we heard the OIG earlier specifically say it was a deliberate misapplication of pay differential. That's a quote.
Yes, I've heard that from Ms. Lamarzi. Our assessment, our investigation, and again, when I say our investigation, is interviewing those managers by Ms. Peduim, clearly understand the order of events, what happened, when happened, how was it, and determining that this wasn't deliberate. This was, again, egregious mistake, and to me, the failure of, I would say, the previous acting director of not either misunderstanding or if it was misunderstood, clarifying, but more importantly, when realized that possibly some policies change, and I think Ms. Peduim can explain better. The event that it happened before these inspectors already prior to implementation of the differential pay were the only group that, along with our public safety, were out there inspecting. So therefore, the way it was explained to me, emotions were high. DPS, everybody's at home now. We are all shut down, all of our buildings. Only this small group of 70 employees are out there. So therefore, at the beginning, how this was handled, there were no differential pay. The hours were given, but later on, I think the failure of the previous leadership of the DPS was when the rules changed, when we implemented the differential pay, nobody went back and say, okay, what else we need to correct?
Ms. Kassir, I appreciate that. Mr. Matalino, do you view this as a mistake, or do you view this as the OIG has clearly stated it here and in her report as a deliberate misapplication of pay differential?
We have not been able to find evidence of malicious intent in this.
So you don't agree with the OIG determination? Do you agree with the OIG interpretation or not that this was a deliberate misapplication of pay differential and that they, quote, collectively decided to do this?
Yes. In the end, yes, they did. This was a management decision that was made by the prior director, who has since, it's important to note, was a merit system employee who was in an acting capacity, who has since retired before, as he had planned well before all of this had occurred, before even the coronavirus had come up. So I don't want anyone to believe his departure was related to this. It was his previously scheduled retirement.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well, which reflects the fact that there has not been accountability up to this point. Ms. Peduim, did you inform anybody in the executive branch once you learned of this issue? I know you took the action, you cooperated with the OIG, which we appreciate. You took the action to stop this from happening in August, within about 8 days of when you met with the OIG for the first time, based on my understanding. Did you inform anybody on the second floor about what was going on and how this was being dealt with?
Yes. Yes. Well, I talked to, Fariba. Also, I talked to the labor relation, and also but this was after the fact that we had stopped the, the charges, and then we took it to meet with the union leader. We all discussed it, but if you allow me a few minutes, I can explain to you a little bit how it happened. I think it would be important that you see the chronological event and also understanding a little bit more about how DPS does the work. And I can assure you that this was not a deliberate act. Actually, the report, the IG report, I understand that it was mentioned in the interview later on, but the IG report is short of saying that that was a deliberate act. I think it was just an unfortunate, misguided attempt to implement a policy while in the middle of a major health crisis. But I can just go ahead for 5 minutes.
Well, I think, let me finish my questions, then perhaps I'll yield to the council president in terms of going through your depiction of events. He may want to turn to colleagues first and then go to that. But I appreciate that. I don't think that the nitpicking and the nickel and diming, which were direct quotes from the interviews, and the OIG's comments earlier, which directly used the deliberate misapplication, is reflective of what we're saying. I'm not putting words in anybody's mouth. I'm just quoting here. But taking it a step further beyond DPS, Mr. Malino, what oversight mechanisms of the COVID differential pay program were established in advance to ensure that something like this didn't happen?
So we attempted to monitor every department as to early on. We made a determination with every department who they thought by class of employees would be eligible for front-facing pay, back office pay, and who would be put off, who was doing teleworking or due to underlying medical conditions were put on leave or allowed to take administrative leave. We monitored to see what that pay, how the pay on a pay period basis compared to what we thought we would find with those positions. Clearly, we thought inspectors would be in front-facing positions, especially after the governor's state of emergency and executive order did clarify and that construction continued to be an essential activity and should be and needed to continue. So we knew in order to ensure the safety of those buildings, the safety of the work sites, we would have to continue to provide the inspections. So we anticipated that those group of inspectors would continue to work and would be eligible for front-facing pay. But
no one's disputing the eligibility for front-facing pay. They're disputing the fact that they were taking 80 hours of front-facing pay, including the time that they weren't front-facing, which directly violated the county policy, which you've already stated. The question is, what was in place not to determine who takes and who doesn't take front-facing pay, but how it's taken and whether or not there is a egregious breach of county policy for individuals who clearly don't deserve the pay that they are taking or that managers are providing them.
Very early on, the Office of Human Resources for the county conducted weekly calls for all managers and what they call HR liaisons, who are the primary points of contact for all administrative HR issues in each department. And they were emphasizing in those calls, as well as the bi-weekly communications that went out that Mr. Marzi mentioned earlier, about the importance of recording accurately what is front-facing, and the supervisor's responsibility to accurately review each of the time cards for employees, for all employees, but particularly for employees who are receiving front-facing pay, to make sure that based on the supervisor knowing what the employee does as part of their duties and responsibilities, whether the recording on the time cards were in fact reflective, supervisor's mind, of what they understood and knew the employee to be doing. And so fundamentally, that's the level of control that the county needed to rely on, because more centrally, there's no way to know, there's no database that exists to be able to know what an employee is actually doing. The supervisor of the employee is actually in the best position to know what the employee is doing, and then look at their time card to say, do these match up?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, clearly, folks who are taking all 80 hours, if it is beyond what seems reasonable, that is something that is not very difficult to catch if you had appropriate measures in place. Obviously, appropriate measures were not in place. I have plenty more questions. I'll ask my last one, then turn to colleagues. Out of respect for time, if there's time, I'd love to come back, Mr. President. But Mr. Madaleno, you responded to the OIG that the county will make, quote, appropriate adjustments to the CARES Act reimbursement request to FEMA. But how will you determine what appropriate adjustments must be made if we also can't account for what these employees were doing at each hour because of flawed data, and therefore can't specify the amount of money that was wrongfully paid out to date? How do you determine appropriate adjustments without knowing what should or shouldn't happen, or without having, to this point, any idea of what the total number is by your own account earlier?
So we will segregate out the Department of Permitting Services so that we do not submit it to FEMA, certainly for reimbursement, unless and until we are 100% certain what we are submitting. We are working to see, and you heard, I think, from Ms. Lamarzi already about how the numbers changed after the guidance was corrected. I think you yourself have said that, you know, clearly they are doing a portion of their day is front facing. So we're trying to work through the issue with permitting services, while at the same time going through the other departments that could be in a similar situation. They have inspectors who are doing similar work, trying to ensure, and that's why Ms. Kassiri, Mr. Brogley, and I have discussed it with a series of department leaders to where there are similar situations, to ensure that the guidance was properly followed, and that we'll take the appropriate remedy, whether it is qualifying, saying where we are confident with the fact that they have the records and that they implemented the policy per guidance, or whether or not that's something we need to hold out for further inspection, even by an outside entity.
Thanks. Before we go to that, I also wanted to thank Ms. Lamarzi, and I think this was a terrific report, unfortunate, disappointing, disturbing report, but a really important report. And I just appreciate all the work that you're doing, and that this council is supporting you in doing to prove the value of our shared commitment to accountability, transparency, and oversight on behalf of county taxpayers. I'll yield back. I do have other questions if there's time, Mr. President.
Well, thank you, and we appreciate all your questions. All of them were good ones. Councilmember Navarro, you had questions that were not answered, so I'm going to turn back to you so that you can remind us what your questions were and ask them directly of the people that you would like to hear from, please.
Thank you. I think Councilmember Feetson touched upon some of the questions that I had asked. Basically, I'd like to know if the administration is going to pursue an independent review and audit of all the funds disbursed so far to ensure fidelity for their purpose, and to understand exactly whether there are issues in other departments, given, again, a lot of the discussion that this council has had and expressing concern regarding the cost, of what the differential pay might actually be for county government. It is important for me to also add that, this has nothing to do with not appreciating the work that our extraordinary employees have done, but obviously we need to understand exactly where we are with a lot of these expenditures. And so the issue of independent review and audit is one that I would like to hear whether that is going to be pursued, as well as the recommendation of the OIG regarding not seeking the federal reimbursement. I already heard Mr. Madaleno say that they're going to adjust. How does that then interact with the conversation that we also had on the council regarding the deadline, the December deadline? How much, how would this affect this, and how much do they believe that amount might be? So those were the two questions that I have posed.
Thank you. Mr. Madaleno.
So we have assembled all of a fair amount of the personnel requests, the personnel expenditures that we believe are eligible for FEMA reimbursement through, I believe, up to September in many cases. Dave is on, Dave Gottesman, who's leading our FARS team. If you want to get into the specifics of where we are on the dollar amounts and the requests, Dave can certainly speak to that. We are confident that we can pursue and continue to submit all of our reimbursement requests for all of our public safety units, fire, police, corrections, sheriff, and they account for the lion's share of the front-facing work. So we can pursue those. I know because the next largest department, the next two largest departments with front-facing pay are Health and Human Services and Transportation. And we are working very quickly to validate their whole process and all of those numbers to make an assessment as to our degree of confidence in submitting that paperwork to FEMA. We're hopefully going to have that review completed by the end of this week or the beginning of next week, recognizing that tomorrow happens to be a national holiday. But we are working rapidly in that regard. And then we are working with Mr. Broglie to make an assessment as to how quickly and what it would look like to bring in an outside body to look at this, an outside auditor to make a quick look at this. Obviously, we are still up against, unless Congress changes the deadline, we are up against the use of the CRF funds for December 30th. So, and then to meet the FEMA deadline, obviously we want to have as much in before Thanksgiving as possible. So this does come at a difficult time from a timing standpoint, but we are taking a serious look at how we would use an outside auditor, an outside entity to help validate what we are finding ourselves with the other departments.
Are you working with DTS for the issue of enhancing the data systems?
Yes, and I'm going to let Miss, I'm always going to mispronounce your last name, I'm so sorry, Baduim, to talk about what DPS is doing. And I'm sorry, Councilmember Navarro, if you said P as in permitting services?
No, technology services. I mean, yes. I think there was some concern about data processes and things of that nature. And I'm just wondering if you've started any conversation with DTS to see how, all these processes, et cetera, could be enhanced.
And can I let Mitra talk about what permitting services is doing about enhancing that side of their shop?
That is fine, but I think that as you look at the system-wide issues, I think there have been, concerns system-wide. It's, I would think it would be important if you do this independent audit, et cetera, that perhaps there should be another look at our database systems and things of that nature to make sure that, that we can integrate data and provide the reports, et cetera, given that that was identified as a challenge, not just in DPS, but perhaps, it's an issue system-wide.
Ms. Navarro, may I just add, this whole system issue is not unique to our DPS. The data is there, but it is in multiple places. So this is kind of trying to bring it all, not other jurisdictions. We have a very robust data Montgomery. Ideally, as Ms. Lamarzi mentioned, all those scattered system, ideally, that's what your work should be in a data Montgomery, in an open platform shared with public. This is our work. Actually, she's working very closely with DTS director. There's actually a project that started, I believe, maybe 4 months ago. And I believe in a year they have something to deliver, but this is not unusual for permitting agencies. So information is there, but it is in multiple places, with inspector, with supervisor, this system, that system. So yes, we are working towards addressing this issue in a very, I would say, futuristic manner.
I appreciate that. I think I just wanted to take a step back and look at the macro issue. The previous report from the OIG that had to do with the data breach, et cetera, also points to this vulnerability and the complexity of all these issues. So I wanted to state that I think there needs to be a broader look and not just, because obviously, given these two reports, there's a nexus there of some issues that need to be examined and need to be enhanced in terms of not just availability of data and being able to access that, but also issues of security. So I think, again, I would like to make sure that the administration is looking at a broad audit of that specific issue.
Thank you. And let me just say to Mr. Madaleno as we go through this list, but if we are not entitled to using CARES money for the extra reimbursement, I think we have to be very careful in what we're submitting. I mean, if we're saying that someone was going to be paid a differential for something that they were not deserving of for that differential, then we should not be, in my opinion, be submitting that concern to be used for CARES money. There's plenty of other areas that we can be using that CARES money for, and that there would be no question about it. And I understand we're going to FEMA as well, but this to me is a real concern. And with that, Councilmember Jawan.
I share your concern. I share your concern, and we are working under tight deadlines to work through all of those various issues. But Councilmember Katz, you are absolutely correct.
Thank you. Councilmember Jawando. Councilmember Jawando. We're going to come back to Councilmember Jawando. Well, Councilmember Jawando, are you there? All right, let's go. Oh, there he is. Okay, you were close.
Sorry, I thought I was number 5 and I became number 3, so that's no problem. I'm happy to move up in the list. But so thank you for the questions of my colleagues. I have a couple just in addition. Let's stick with the FEMA reimbursement since that was just brought up. And Dr. Stoddard, maybe you can chime in, or Mr. Madaleno. So where are we with submitting? Have we submitted for differential pay? Are those applications in? And if not, when are they going in?
We have an aggressive schedule, and I'm going to let, if you don't mind, Mr. Gottesman speak to that, because he's been leading our effort and would have the most up-to-date data for you.
Whoever's appropriate, that's fine.
Thank you. Dave Gottesman, County Staff Manager, OMB. So let me just say as an opening blanket statement that we are in no way advocating that the county submit anything to FEMA that's questionable. Full stop on that. That's clear. So where we are right now generally, and I'll of course mention this, the differential. So we have, as you know, already submitted $31.1 million to FEMA. The next tranche of 33.4 million has been documented by the FARS team, which is the team of county employees who are doing the documentation work in concert with department fiscal staff to get everything packaged for our consultant who reviews everything before submission to FEMA. So 33.4 million, it has been documented already. That
33.4 million of what?
Yeah, I'm going to tell you that is a combination of operating and personal expenditures. It does not include the differential. So that's been 82% of that 33.4 million is operating, and the remainder is personnel. So the vast majority is operating expenditures. The differential bucket, the large bucket of differential, is scheduled to be for the FARS team to have completed documentation by this Friday, and by early next week be packaged, so to speak, for the consultant's review. What we know about that large bucket of differential is, as Rich mentioned, as the CIO mentioned, an enormous percentage of that is police and fire, public safety folks, which is not a gray area here because of the way that their contract was structured for front-facing differential. So the number that I have is about approximately 21.5 million of the differential is IAFF and FOP employees. And then you factor in the FICA, that's another 1.6 million. So after that large bucket of differential money that is not, up for discussion, so to speak, there's no gray area there. What we will rely on is the judgment of the internal audit team and any external folks that are brought in to say, okay, you can move forward with this department, HHS, good to go. Recreation, good to go. And
so let me just stop you there for 1 second. I just want to make sure I'm clear on what you're saying. So the 21.5 million of differential pay for IAFF and FOP plus the 1.6 for FICA. So that's 23.1 million. That will be your intention is to submit that because that doesn't have an issue. Is that what you're stating?
What I'm stating is that yes, but when I say submit, the way the process works is it goes from us through OEMHS to OEMHS's consultant that reviews and blesses and packages everything for the final FEMA submission. Right. So it will be, yes, what you just said is correct.
And so Dr. Stoddard, when would that be submitted? How long does that consultant, and when would you expect to submit that portion?
I mean, right now we're going to submit before Thanksgiving, that's for sure. So obviously with the timing, we've asked them to take about a week. If it takes slightly longer than that, it'll be before the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. It'll be out the door before then.
And then the remainder. So for every other agency, government department, your intention is to conduct this internal / external, we'll get to that in a second, review, and not submit those dollars until you can confirm that there was not any erroneous payment. Is that a correct statement, Mr. Gottesman or Mr. Madaleno?
Yes.
Okay. That seems appropriate to me. I think segregating the dollars from police and fire and then doing a review of non-emergency services agencies, that seems appropriate. So I'm just going to say that off the bat. I don't think we should wait for that money. That will be reimbursed, is the most likely to be reimbursed. So I think we should submit that. All right, and that's helpful on that issue. On the external audit, it sounds like there is a willingness, Mr. Madaleno, to look into that portion. You've heard from several colleagues. I appreciate the work that Ms. Lamarzi and the IAG has done, but it sounds like you are looking into that to do the review of the agencies. Is that correct?
Yes, and we're trying to figure out exactly what would be the parameters for what we would be looking for from an outside entity, an auditor, a consultant, someone to do the review.
Okay, Ms. Lamarzi, was that one of your suggestions? Do you feel like you had the capacity? Do you think that would be helpful to do that outside audit and bring in those resources?
that the outside audit was not one of the recommendations that we had put forward. I will say I think doing a full audit will be challenging because of some of the data issues we've talked about that may carry over in other departments. And I don't know if in the end you will get exactly what you're looking for. It's very hard to create a testing parameter, but it certainly could be done. And our office will continue to look into other places where we can add value ourselves in doing focused audits that would assist you and the CE with making the appropriate determinations.
Well, I appreciate that answer. That's a big answer there. We don't want to throw good money after bad here. If we're not going to get, just because we can be big and say, hey, we're doing an external audit, I know it sounds good, but if we're not going to get the information, because of the data issues, I think, Mr. Madaleno, you should take that into account as you're looking into consultants. And before we sign a contract for what could be a lot of money, that we make sure that there's the capability and the data is there. And maybe Ms. Lamarzi, you can, since you've done some initial investigation, can help, with that decision or focused of whether there will be the information available to do the deep dive internal audit. Because, we funded you, and I'm appreciative to my GEO colleagues and other colleagues and I was very supportive, making sure you had additional resources to do your job. I do think that's a threshold question. We should definitely kick the tires on that. Mr. Madaleno, you want to respond?
I'm in agreement, and that's one of the things we're trying to work through with if we could design something, could we get someone on board? How much would it cost? Would the cost, in fact, be more than in a cost-benefit analysis, more than it might be worth? What can we do internally? It's great to hear what Ms. Lamarzi just said, and maybe there's a way within our own resources we can quickly do a joint review to see how we can validate what's happened in other departments.
And if I can, just Councilmember Tawando and Mr. Madaleno, offices of Inspector General, we are fiercely protective of our independence. And all of the work that we perform must be impartial in fact and appearance. And so as we internally begin to continue looking at these issues, and you can imagine my staff in the last several days has just been brainstorming and looking at different places that we can continue to add value to this discussion. Any review that we do and what the administration does, I meet with Ms. Kassiri often. Mr. Broglie talks to my staff as well. We have informal discussions sometimes about ideas or issues that we've seen that may be better addressed internally in the executive branch. And then what we see and what we do, the work we do, we are required by the statute to perform all of our work in accordance with the standards, government auditing and Association of Inspectors General standards. So though I like to say I'm happy to talk to everyone and try to share ideas, ultimately the work that my office does, I have to be sure is objective and independent from any of the other work that is being done by the executive branch.
Yeah, and we want you to be, and I think that's why we've given you additional resources. So even, so in my view, it's a minimum a two-step process. Maybe there's a three-step with an external entity, but Mr. Madaleno and the departments do their review. That information is obviously valuable to you, Ms. Lamarzi, as you all do your independent review, which should remain independent. That's the point of an OIG. And then I think, if at that point, maybe there's a consideration of external. In my view, I think we should let you do your job and you tell us if you think that would be helpful. If you think a more forensic analysis or some skill set that's not available where OIG is helpful, we should take direction from you on that as opposed to just bringing it in. So that would be my view on that. I have one more question. You said, Mr. Madaleno, you're not sure the amount. You started to say it and then you held yourself back in your opening comments. Can you give us an idea of the amount in the DPS context that was improperly paid?
It is in the range of of 100,000 to maybe 150,000. I think that is our top end current estimates. I'm looking at Mitra to see if I misinterpreted the information she provided me.
Well, I can say that what we did the last 4 month pay period from September and October, that this has been corrected and the reductions have been verified by the IG office. We calculated that and made an average per pay period. And we used that pay period for the first 11 pay period or 5 months that the charges were done by mistake. So when we did that, we came up to be $103,000 at all total for 5 months. If I divide that by the number of the inspectors that have been charging front-facing, that is between 70 to 75, so I get an average of 72.5, I come up to $1,420 per inspector overpaid during these 5 months.
Thank you very much. I think that's important context. 72.5 employees, $1,400 overpaid. And then to the question of your investigation, at least preliminarily, has suggested that this was not intentional, but it was negligence, to use a legal term, that people didn't check, and they in the quote, the nitpicking, that they weren't going to go back and look it over. So it was a lack of oversight.
Yes,
is what you're saying on the part of the managers. Is that intention also to the folks that submitted it? Have you looked into the intent of the employees who submitted?
I want to use just 2 minutes. I have been with these, managers for the last 6 months. And also I have spent quite time with the previous acting director. I can assure you there is nothing that they did that was deliberate. This was basically lack of fear, concern about the safety of the inspectors. Remember, 2/3 of the staff were sent home, and 1/3 was sent in the harm ways of COVID at the peak of this virus that was in March. And they never closed. Before even this front-facing comes in, these inspectors were sent in the middle of March, and they were doing the work. And many of them do spend 8 hours a day in the field. That's the regular way of doing it. But during the virus, they were allowed that not to do the real-time inspection and take some of the inspections by the end of the day somewhere else that was safer. So this practice went on for 3 weeks. And when the negotiations were completed, and none of these division chiefs were part of those negotiations, when the acting director was participating with the meetings, he came back and he told everyone that the inspectors are doing essential functions and they are eligible for the 8 hours front facing. And when the questions was raised that what does exactly mean, they were said that it's not going to be nickel and dime. So I'm not going to hide that this was said, but the division chief did the best. And believe me, this is talking about 1 or 2 hours of inspector time per day that if they had made a mistake. And not all of them did that. This was just some, because remember that like our FCC inspectors, that they didn't charge because they were home. Everywhere was closed. That was the only reason that they didn't do a front facing, because for the first 1 and 2 months, our FCC inspectors, everywhere was closed. All the businesses were closed. It was moratorium to get into the closed spaces. Yeah. And also our, right-of-way inspectors and zoning inspectors didn't go to the violations, but our building inspectors, they had commercial and residential and land development.
Sure.
The business was open. They had to be there every single day. So it was, I can assure you, it was not deliberate.
Well,
it was just a mistake.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. And I'll just say that I think that's important context. I know you've been trying to say those statements, which I think is important.
Yes.
I'm glad that Ms. Lamarzi's team did their job. I'm glad the hotline is working. I think we need more investigation into the intent and effect of what happened. I certainly understand, Ms. Podim, that in March, April, May, June, this was very scary. I understand, and that people were going out to work and it wasn't sure what was happening, and we wanted to make sure people were compensated and were safe. And so I get that, and I think that's important context. Obviously, $150,000, that's not nothing. That is important. But I'm glad to hear that some of it has already been, clawed, corrected, and that you're looking into the rest. And I would just, Ms. Lamarzi, just please stay in touch with us and let us know what you need to find out exactly what happened. And obviously, Ms. Madrileno, we want to know the findings of what you do as well. So this is, disappointing. Seems like, several mistakes, and hopefully we can improve our processes here. But I want to thank all of our frontline employees. I think this is something that can be corrected, and really appreciate all the work that they're doing on the front line. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
And I can promise I correct it. I'm going to promise that we're going to watch it every single hour, every single minute. So this is going to continue, and I can promise you that.
Thank you. Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Mr. President. Over the summer, a married couple contacted me with a problem. They were in the process of adopting a child and they needed a home inspection. But the county wasn't doing home inspections, and this couple was stuck. So I had requested inspectors use video technology to check out the home, a practice that was being conducted and used in other jurisdictions in the DC region. And by the time our county inspectors resumed home inspections, the adoption agency had closed its doors because of the economic crisis. I share this story because I've been hearing from constituents since COVID started about how the reductions in front-facing operations have impacted their lives. And here we are talking about how some people took advantage of that, of the crisis, and of the generosity that the county has given to our employees, hardworking employees, to do what needed to be done during the height of this pandemic. And all of that said, the findings in this Inspector General's report are troubling, disheartening, and clearly a breach of trust with Montgomery County taxpayers. This is why we have an Inspector General's office. And this is why the council has increased the budget very recently for the Inspector General, because good government requires it. And for anyone who's following this conversation, if you see fraud, waste, or abuse taking place in our government, call the fraud hotline, 240-777-7644. If you see something, say something. And this has been a really important conversation. And I appreciate all of my colleagues asking questions to the effect of who knew what and when. Smart, important questions. And there's been a thread that has emerged also just regarding the Office of Inspector General and maybe the parameters around that office. And Ms. Lamarzi, according to the report, this complaint came in May of 2020, earlier this year. And by Mr. Madaleno's admission, they only learned about it when the report came over, the draft report came over, because I too wanted to know why we weren't informed about this earlier. And so can you walk us through the timeline? And, the minute that you got a complaint and you started investigating, explain to us how we got to this point where months have gone by and we're now having this conversation.
Sure. So we did receive the initial complaint May 8th. We began a preliminary review. We received a second complaint May 21st. Complaints have had a number of different issues that needed to be looked at. This wasn't the only one. This was just the one that needed to go further. We have an internal process that we follow to vet complaints that come in, and sometimes we may even be dealing in a situation where we have an anonymous complainant. If you want to remain anonymous, you absolutely can remain anonymous when you file a complaint with our office. Sometimes that can slow us down too, and to be able to ask follow-up questions and take the time. But we began our analysis and field work probably by the beginning of June, I would say. I think I signed off on the investigatory plan June 11th. I've mentioned we follow standards because we have to really be sure that there can be confidence in the objectivity of the work that we do. And so we do have a process that has to be followed. And then you've heard the gathering and analysis of the data was very problematic in this situation. I don't have to tell anybody else who's teleworking. Teleworking slows things down as well. Scheduling time to talk with everyone. You can't just pop into someone's office the way you normally would. So our processes have been slowed down significantly during the pandemic. But my staff was reviewing and collecting data on their own. We try to validate as much data as we can from the source documents. We began requesting information from DPS the beginning of July and continued with our field work then throughout the summer. Some interviews were done at the end of July. It is summer, people are on vacation, slows you down as well. We really want to be sure that our work can speak for itself, and we have to back up everything that we are discussing. So it is a process that takes time. The first interview with the director was August 21st, and she was certainly on notice at that point of what we were concerned about. She, from my reading of the interview reports, was very forthcoming. She recognized it was a problem. She's very conscientious about the budget and the amount of costs involved with the differential pay and the precarious situation the county is in fiscally. We requested more information. She got us more information. My staff met with her again September 1st and was at that point ready to interview all of the managers involved. And so had to conduct those interviews. In a normal scenario, I'd say we'd walk into their office and say, okay, you're at 9, you're at 10, 11, 12, 1, and we do them straight in a row so they can't talk to each other. They can't perhaps make stories match with one another. And then I do talk to the administration when I have concerns about things that are immediately happening. You've seen sometimes we issue what's called a management alert, that there is a significant item that needs to be addressed immediately, and the administration takes an action right away. We knew approximately around August 29th that DPS had stopped allowing this 80 hours per pay period, if you will, of differential. So we were satisfied that there was no longer, we'd stopped the bleeding, for lack of a better term at that point. And I did have conversations with Ms. Kassiri, and we had other conversations with the director. And then we begin to write after we finish. And the writing process has to go through formal approvals as well. And you all met around October 13th, I think, to talk about differential pay. That was a contributing factor for us. We needed to make sure that we had all the information. So we wanted to be able to follow up on anything that was said. And then a draft report was issued October 29th. And there's usually a short turnaround on an investigative report. It's not like our large audits. And the administration responded right away. We had a conversation sort of that first night that they would be able to meet our response time. There was a question earlier about divulging the information in a report ahead of time, and Mr. Madaleno is correct. Our statute lays out the process for reporting and publication of our reports, and it requires that we give the administration an advance copy and that they have time to respond, and any response that is received goes into our reports so that they get to have their voices heard. We want it to be an equitable, fair process. That is written into our statute for how we follow the release of reports from anything off of our work plan. And we have an agreement, and it's been the practice before even I got here, that the OIG and the administration follows that same process. And the statute says that the Inspector General can keep confidential the subject of their report until publication. And so we do follow to give advance notice of the final report. Sometimes when we send it first over, the report went over October 29th. In certain circumstances, it is a draft. Things could have gotten miscommunicated. We could have gotten wrong. We want to make sure that we have correct information. And so we give the administration a chance to talk to us. And so it is a process that is in place to assure the accuracy of anything that comes out of our office.
Well, I really appreciate that you sharing with us your thorough and methodical process. Really important to understand how you all go about your work so that we can go about protecting Montgomery County taxpayers ultimately, right? And ultimately, we want to provide you with all the tools necessary to stop improper action. And I think you just hinted, you didn't hint, you came out and said what your governing statute, the parameters of those governing statutes. And so if my colleagues, if anyone wants to take a look at that, and we can have more conversations about how other Office of Inspector Generals across the country or across the region, how they operate, and if they have some of those same constraints or parameters, happy to engage in that conversation again with the goal of providing as much oversight and as quickly a time as possible. Real quick, I just have just another question or two. The report also says that other county departments may also be misapplying COVID differential pay and possibly paying underserving employees COVID differential pay. That's directly from the report. Can you share with us if there are other investigations underway regarding differential pay?
I can neither confirm nor deny the investigations that we may be pursuing at this time.
Are there any other investigations underway regarding the use of CARES Act funding?
Not investigations, but as you are aware, we have done a formal review of the FEG program, which obviously is very vested in the CARES Act. And we issued a lessons learned last month because we really didn't want to hold up letting everyone know of some of the best practices and recommendations that we had learned. And the administration took that, and I will tell everyone if you don't know, and put it out to everyone in the administration and to all the department directors to ensure that future grant applications are going to meet those best practices. So that report, though, Councilmember Glass, is forthcoming.
So, in closing,
and I will say we probably have one other.
Okay. So in your ability to be as candid as possible, you can't share with us whether or not there are any other investigations underway regarding differential pay, and that's the rub. We're in this situation because improper acts were taking place, and a process which is prescribed in law resulted in us not knowing about it for a while, and allowed for those actions to continue for a while. And we want to stop these actions. We want to stop all improper actions from happening here, quite frankly. And I'm sure I'm looking around and seeing comments from colleagues, and I think we'll be revisiting this to see how we can continue strengthening your department while making sure that malpractice does not fester, and trying to nip it in the bud as soon as it occurs, while being fair in our treatment and allowing people to have their say in the process, because we want a thorough and fair process overall. And so, Ms. Lamarzi, I want to commend you and your staff for the work that you continue to do. It is so critically important, and we want to make sure the taxpayers of Montgomery County have trust in our government, and that this type of action doesn't happen again. So many more conversations. Thank you for your candor, and I yield back, Mr. President.
Thank you. Councilmember Albornoz.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's going to be a long day. I will try to be brief because I think my colleagues did a good job covering many bases, but I want to start from this place. And as all of my colleagues agree, acknowledge the sacrifices that all county employees, particularly those in the front lines, have made since the beginning of the pandemic, putting themselves and their families in harm's way to continue to serve our public. I also want to acknowledge and thank whoever the person was that came forward from DPS and made this report, because that is such a critical component of this process. And Ms. Lamarzi, as always, thank you and your team for following up on the report and the allegations and providing us with the very thorough report, even with limited data that is available. So I just want to start from that place. But this report really felt like a punch in the gut on a lot of different levels, because there were already lots of questions swirling around deferential pay, policies and interpretations of those policies regarding deferential pay, which have been looming. And this is on top of all of that, further compounding the challenges that we face in hoping that we receive the reimbursement from FEMA, because if not, it will provide a huge and gaping hole in our operating budget that will be difficult to fill. So to add issues on top of that is just difficult to process, quite frankly. And I think the other thing for context here that's important is, you know, as a local government and as government in general, our county residents are hurting right now. And I'm just stating the obvious, but, you know, we have almost 200,000 people that have filed for unemployment. We're going to sign an executive order later this morning, now maybe this afternoon, that will likely mean the closure of more businesses here in our county, which I think, given the circumstances of COVID, is a decision that unfortunately we have to make. But it just means that more eyes are on county government. The trust of us as a government with our county residents is so critical and so sacred. And our county government has set a gold standard for operations for, frankly, generations. And that's why this really did also feel like a punch in the gut, because it's another example of where a system broke down. There was an issue systemically. And I appreciate, Mr. Madaleno, you discussing the severity of this and acknowledging that and owning it in your opening comments, because this is a severe situation. This goes beyond $150,000 and 70 employees and a handful of managers. It goes well beyond that. And I think we need to acknowledge that up front and be able to respond in a way that goes beyond just the recommendations from one report. And I appreciate you acknowledging that, but I do have to say that this is a systemic failure. And I absolutely support an outside audit, not just to look at the checks and balances and the data collection, but we have heard repeatedly from department heads over the last 6 months that there are concerns regarding bandwidth. There are concerns regarding capacity, which is perfectly understandable given what has been put on their plates. But I don't have a high degree of confidence that we are in a place right now, as we maybe would have been a year ago under the circumstances, to be able to credibly conduct our own full evaluation and assessment, not just of this one incident. And I do have confidence in Mitra's ability to clean this up and to address this through DPS. But those checks and balances within other departments, which were already weakened prior to the pandemic, because of a number of vacancies and a lot of turnover, I think is something that has to be included within the scope of this audit. The checks and balances that exist within departments is very fragile. And I can speak about this very much in the first person. It's often just one or two or a handful of individuals, even within large departments, who have the responsibility of oversight of all of these issues. And they are overwhelmed right now. And because they're having to work in such unusual circumstances, put in an even further difficult position. And so I call upon you, Rich, and the entire administration to see what exactly needs to be done to support our county agencies and departments, to give them the administrative support, to give them the operational support that they need to be able to carry out their functions and duties. Because if we continue to spring leaks like this, then it's going to further whittle away the public trust in our local government. And that has implications for our COVID response, because we're already getting, understandably, a lot of very frustrated county residents who are saying, why in the world are you scaling back when kids aren't able to go to classes? And it's just the social and emotional toll on our residents. And then when they hear the county employees are double dipping is awful. And it feels like a slap in the face and a punch in the gut to all of our county residents as well. So I have heard and I believe that this administration is going to take this seriously. But I would like to see what the plan will be, what the scope of this audit will be, and this is just a step one. There needs to be a follow-up as soon as possible. And I commend my colleagues in the GO committee who had the foresight, even before all of this, to acknowledge that we needed more support within our Inspector General's office. And if we need additional support for this audit, I think it's worth the investment, even if it will be limited in its scope because of the ability to collect data or not collect data, because we need a full assessment across the board. And yes, I will say this, and I said it before during the incidents with former CAO Klein, we need to hear from the county executive as well, because ultimately he is responsible for this administration. And this is not the first time that there has been an incident or an issue that, at least initially, was not treated with the level of seriousness that I think it should have been, because ultimately the buck stops with him. And I think it's important for him, as we have a follow-up to this discussion, for us to hear from the county executive and what his feelings are on this particular incident and the systemic issues I raised before. Because it's unfair to put his team up like this without him formally responding. I think that will be very important moving forward. So those are obviously mostly comments. I guess if you had to whittle that down into two specific questions, I'd like to know what the scope of the audit will be, whether it's done internally or I believe should be done with outside support. How long will that take? And is it going to also look at some of these checks and balances and systemic issues that exist within departments?
Thank you very much, Councilmember Albornoz. I think the way you characterized this as a punch to the gut is exactly how I feel, is exactly how Ms. Kassiri feels, that this team feels, because of the efforts that so many people have made across this enterprise to continue to provide services, to put themselves at risk, to put their families at risk by continuing to go to work. The number of them, of our staff who have unfortunately contracted the coronavirus, who've been ill with it, who've passed away as a result. So, it really does make me sick. I mean, just trying to get through this weekend with a degree of focus of trying to how we move forward. So I agree with you. It's been a punch. We feel it. The county executive feels it. I will share your comments with him because I know he shares the frustration that you all have expressed. we will keep you up to date. I mean, I think I've tried to say that, the specifics of an audit, how we move forward, those things are in formulation and discussion. So, but I would also like to say, if there are employees that see these sorts of incidences happening, calling the IG is not the only avenue. Anyone is welcome to come to me, to come to the county executive, to come to Ms. Kasiri, to say that something is wrong in one of the departments, that this is being misinterpreted, and we can fix it. So it's great that we have this anonymous tip line, but it's also, there are lots of ways, the employees should know there are lots of ways that you can also contact us to fix situations like this. Because if that, ideally, if that had happened, then we wouldn't be in the same position. But I also agree with you, Councilmember Albornoz, and that's why I've been hesitant about saying the number of employees or the amount of money, because in some ways it can be taken as disrespecting what happened, minimizing what happened, and that's not at all what the county executive believes, that I believe, and that this team believes in. So that's why I haven't wanted to focus on the numbers, because any dollar wasted is too much in this circumstance.
I appreciate that. I just go ahead, Ms. Kasiri.
Just as far as external, as Mr. Malino said, we will, after whatever we heard today, we can come back. But internally, what we were planning to do is, so last week after Ms. Lamarzi's report was issued, because after that she actually, I felt that we are authorized to be able to do something, although I think my hands got slapped. It seemed like I went out there earlier. We basically decided to make a additional formal notification to our departments, explicitly told them going forward, we want to make sure rules are clear. Going backward, as far as the auditing, which you asked us, so what we plan to do most likely today or tomorrow, what we were planning to do is, you already have the data for the last 7 months for each department. So we isolated for each department, for the front-facing, all the monies given for front-facing employees. So we were going to send it to each department director, require them do a number of things. One, go through that with each division, each section, each unit. Clearly identify those areas or the division or section that actually were using front-facing, the logic of if there were any 40 hours. And in addition, not go beyond the 40 hours per week, come back with a process they follow to not only communicate the policy, monitor the policy, and continue to implement the policy. So that would have been, we were going to do it with a random auditing, collect the data, but on this parallel track, but that's the one that's going to take till end of November. But in a parallel track, very small group of us, our internal audit manager, myself, and some people from finance, for ourselves to analyze, we are analyzing the data from NC Time for all the 40 hours per week front-facing operation that we have identified, because we know what they are. I mean, we are clear. For example, the cashier in DEP, we already know the cashier was there 8 hours a day. So that is kind of, it's clear. On the same track, a small group of us doing an additional, I would say, review of that, just to make sure, because our goal is to be able to give enough guidance to our FEMA folks when they're submitting their second round. So that was our plan. And again, based on what we heard today, I think we're going to regroup with Mr. Madaleno to see what are the next steps regarding possibly external auditor. But that was our plan for our internal auditing of the process.
I appreciate that. My last comment, or maybe just a suggestion, is, understandably, our assistant chief administrative officers, and by extension, other key personnel within county government, are doing everything they can on recovery and sort of those external programs and services that we're trying desperately to provide to our county residents on every level. But it does go back to something I said earlier, and that's bandwidth. And so while everybody is doing those things, I just worry, Ms. Kassiri, that, because in addition to the, I thought, reasonable instructions that we were copied on and were sent to department heads, there has to be somebody from the administration that follows up individually and is having conversations on a weekly basis with those department heads and literally sitting down with them, now virtually, would have been in person before, and going through a checklist and making sure that they have what they need and the support that they need. I'm just not confident that there's enough bandwidth to do that right now. And so we're going to have to, in the short term, continue to rely on staff that are overworked and overwhelmed. And that's why I think as part of this audit, and I've been saying this for a while, there has to be some additional layer of administrative support or help. And I know that's challenging, but I think really critical. This is just another example of why it's important we get that right. So thank you, Mr. Council President. I yield back to you.
Thank you. Councilmember Raymer.
Thank you. Really appreciate Ms. Lamarzi and her work. This is a very important point. I want to recognize the employees who are taking more risk. I think about our bus drivers, our congressional employees, inspectors who would have to go into private residences. Appropriate hazard pay for those employees is justified. But looking narrowly at the issues presented in this report, it defies common sense how anyone could think that they could appropriately claim a hazard pay increase for telework that is obviously not hazardous. And requiring employees to account for their time is not nickel and diming them. As Councilmember Albornoz, I thought, very knowledgeably presented to us moments ago, this speaks to a lack of organization and management at the county government. I also think it speaks to a cavalier attitude about the precious funds that we've received in our own county's shaky finances, and ultimately towards the taxpayers who are going to pay for this. And let's not forget that many of them are also taking risks in their jobs, and they're not getting hazard pay. This program is a potential $100 million expense to the county, and it would be by far our largest expense for the COVID emergency if we ultimately had to pay much of it locally, larger than support provided to small businesses or to rental assistance or even to food or any other crisis need. I guess I'll just say the executive voluntarily entered into this pay agreement without consulting the council or without seeking our approval, although that was clearly an option. And I have questions about the basis of that agreement. It does not contemplate a pandemic emergency. And I have questions about the authority of the executive to commit these funds unilaterally. So I think the council needs to review the agreement, the underlying agreement, and we need the executive to do what we've been begging him to do for months, which is to work with the council to figure out how much money is available and determine our priorities between employee compensation and aid for our communities. Our needs are about to skyrocket with the wave that is crashing over us. And at the same time, it appears that the executive is leading us toward a cliff and just hoping that Congress will pop up at the last minute to save us. Mitch McConnell is not going to do that. And we need a plan that is based in reality. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Vice President Hucker.
Thank you, Mr. President. I agree with so much my colleagues have said. Obviously, this report represents an extremely concerning breach of trust. It's again a reminder of how important our Inspector General is. And after that office was cut dramatically during the last recession, I'm very glad that the last council and this council have restored funding to it. And it's as Councilmember Albornoz mentioned, it's a reminder of how important whistleblowers are and how they need to be protected. I hear you, Rich, that we hope any employee would feel safe enough to call you or the county executive's office, but many won't. And there are contractors and other residents that won't and that will fear retribution and will want to protect their anonymity. And it's just great that we have a vigorous Inspector General office and that we've invested in it. Like the Council President, Councilmember Albornoz and Hans too, I want to recognize the great work our county employees are doing every day on the front lines. And I think we just need to thank them for doing it. It's important that they hear that in an atmosphere like this, whether they're police or fire or inspectors or environmental staff or bus drivers, any of them that are putting their lives on the line to provide high quality public services. This report is associated so far, based on everything we know so far, with a small number of managers, and we don't want the public or the media to cast broad aspersions on our other employees. Any mismanagement of our finite funding jeopardizes and hurts our essential workers and our frontline workers as much as it does all our residents. Fully support the IG's recommendation. I spoke with Ms. Lamarzi that the morning that the report was being released, and she made a great point about the way federal agencies audit that I don't think has come up. And if you'll correct me if I say it wrongly, but the federal government is allowed to extrapolate costs, so they can look at this small amount of data and cast doubt on all of our submissions, and then come back to us and say that we're on the hook for millions of dollars that we would have to disprove. Is that correct, Ms. Lamarzi? And that's what we want to avoid by having a full review or independent audit. I'm glad we envision that in the future. I agree with what Gabe said about this could be much larger. We hope that it's not, but we didn't know about this 2 weeks ago. And as they say, we don't know what we don't know at this point. But I want to ask Rich or Dr. Stoddard, how have you thought about how the review that will be needed here, or the audit, will that have an impact on your ability to meet the December 30th deadline? I hope we can do both, but I think we all would want to know if there's if it poses any risk to your ability to make that deadline.
Thank you, Councilmember Hucker. It makes me less confident than I was before October 29th. But I think everything that we've talked about with moving forward with large groups, that we know there is not a question about the front-facing piece. Whether that's our transportation operation with the bus drivers, as you mentioned, whether it's corrections, police, fire, places where it's clear and understood, and the consultant that we've been using is very bullish on our ability to be reimbursed for those funds. So it's added a new wrinkle of us sort of dividing what we are extremely confident in, giving to the consultant for their review and submission, and then putting some aside in a way that we had not considered, so that we can do a much deeper review as to the efficacy of submitting those costs for reimbursement.
Okay.
If I may add, approximately 10 departments cover 90% of the differential costs. And so in any review that we can do, we can prioritize and focus on those departments that bear such a large disproportionate burden of the differential costs, which will allow us to, this review will have to be detailed, but also we can focus on that subset in terms of prioritizing them to get the FEMA reimbursement worked out in a timely fashion.
That's very helpful. Thank you. And then finally, I just want to add, for the benefit of any of my colleagues that aren't on the public safety committee, that at least I was very surprised to hear at a recent briefing that Councilmember Navarro was smart enough to request about the epidemic we're experiencing of speeding and reckless driving, that our police have been not just allowed, but encouraged, it sounds like, from the leadership to subside from making traffic stops during COVID in an attempt to remove themselves from any increased hazard due to encounters with drivers during traffic stops, as well as, they said, to avoid any accusations of racial bias. As far as I know, I don't know for sure, but I imagine those officers have been receiving hazard pay as well. I'm concerned about that decision by MCP leadership and the fact that we just found out about it, even though it's been happening for months, apparently, while we've had this epidemic of speeders and reckless drivers. Mr. Madaleno, were you aware of that change in policy, and do you know if those officers have been receiving hazard pay?
I was not aware of that policy. I have to say, I mean, having been on this job for 2 months, going through this, I have to say on that piece, I was not. Yes, the decision was made. The police officers who are out are on the front line and have been getting the front-facing pay, as has been the approach used by jurisdictions, just about, as far as I know, every jurisdiction that has been providing any sort of hazard pay differential, whatever we call it.
Right.
They have been receiving it for their full shift.
Right. No, I'm supportive of our officers and any front-facing workers getting hazard pay. I think we should have a policy going forward for when it might end and what conditions. But
yes,
obviously, I think there's it's a surprise to find out they're receiving it if they've withdrawn from engaging with the public. So I just wanted to flag it here as we're engaging in a broader review, because I think that needs to be. So those are my questions. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilmember Rice.
So I'm not going to try and belabor this. Let me just read something very quickly that says, the former acting director and the 4 division chiefs stated that collectively they decided to allow inspectors to claim front-facing differential for their entire workday rather than nickel and dime them by asking that they account for individual hours. To me, this is larger than just this. It's an attitude about taxpayer dollars. And that's what concerns me most. I don't view this as an error. I view it, and I don't view it as a mistake. I view it as a wrongful judgment in terms of how to treat money that's not yours. And it certainly is one in which, look, when I think about how I operate my office, I go and I buy used chairs, right, from an auction to put in my office. I don't go out and buy new stuff because I think that it's ridiculous to buy all new things if you can find something that works for your office and save taxpayer money. These are things that people make decisions about all the time. The sofa in my office is something that I got from surplus from Montgomery County that was sitting in a warehouse. This is what it's that simple notion that I can just dole out taxpayer funds because it's not coming out of my pocket. And therefore, sure, if it's a couple extra bucks, who cares? What does it matter? Who is it hurting? And the reality is that it hurts a lot of people because that money then isn't being able to use to fund nurses and to fund behavioral health and to fund schools and to fund, differential when it comes to folks who need EBT and SNAP assistance and all those kinds of things. It adds up and it goes to those things. So yes, it is serious, and it's not nickel and diming. It's proper use of funds that we have that are allocated for this county that are given by our taxpayers and hoping that we do the right thing with their money. And that's why this is such a big deal. It's not about the actual size. I agree with some of my colleagues that $150,000 is still a lot of money, but it's not about that. It's about the mindset that's there that it didn't matter, that it wasn't a big deal. And it is a big deal because you should be thinking that way all the time with how you're trying to save money and conserve so that we can spend it in the proper way to ensure we're getting the biggest bang for our buck, knowing that this isn't an endless supply. We are not the federal government. We do not print money here in Montgomery County. Just because we have a AAA bond rating does not mean that we're swimming in dough. We struggle every single year to try and fund priorities that are important for our constituency. And for folks to then go out and say, oh, well, I'm not going to nickel and dime, folks, it's not a big deal. That's egregious. So please, let's not pretend as though this is something simple of a, oh, well, it was just a misjudgment or it was a mistake. That's wrong. It's not a mistake when you do something like this. When you're charged with, as a division chief or an acting director, and you're charged with the, you have to make sure that you're making the right decisions for how your department or your division moves forward. That's a huge charge. If you can't do it and you can't step up to that task, then you shouldn't be in the position. It's just that simple. So let me just say that while my colleagues have been a little bit nicer about this, I'm just going to say, and I could care less who calls me or emails me, it was wrong to utilize taxpayer dollars and just think that it didn't matter and it wasn't going to have any effect on anyone. Tell that to the people that are standing in food lines right now. Tell that to the people who are getting evicted from their homes. Tell that to the people who are getting their utilities shut off because we don't have enough money to give them. Tell that to the person who wants to have mental health for their child and is looking to Montgomery Cares to help them, and we don't have enough funds to go around to support it. You tell them that, and that it's just nickel and diming and it doesn't matter. It all matters. So again, let's treat this as serious as it is. I appreciate everyone saying that we're going to move forward and do better, but we've got to have a conversation with everyone who is in charge of making these types of decisions to make sure that they understand just how serious this is. This is incredibly important because at a time like this, when everyone is looking at us with a flashlight to make sure that we're doing everything right, we don't want to be the example of how, oh, look, that's what they do. They misuse the funds. I can just see it now. You're just playing into the playbook for folks who are like, oh, the additional CARES funding is going to line people's pockets and not going to truly what it's supposed to be doing. That's the narrative that we're feeding into by doing things like this. So let's get it right, folks. Let's clean this up. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Now we have two follow-up council members that want to follow up some questions as a follow-up. Just as a time check, it's 11:47, so we're going to call on Councilmember Navarro first, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll be very brief. I feel strongly as well that I need to double down and circle back to my original remarks. We are fortunate that we have the foresight to strengthen the OIG's office. As soon as we realized that we were going to have to approve a record number of special appropriations, it became clear to many of us that we were very fortunate to have strengthened this office because this was unusual to have that many special appropriations. It was unusual to have to deconstruct the budget and make a decision to adopt it through a framework of continuity of operations. We were not able to honor pay raises because of the unprecedented nature of this particular pandemic. And when the executive informed us that they were going to offer differential pay, we did not push back because it was very clear that we needed to ensure that our employees were compensated in a way that was appropriate given their possible exposure as frontline employees. So I want to make sure, because I know Council Vice President Hucker mentioned the names of the council members who had thanked our employees. I did that from the very beginning. This is not about casting some kind of, dispersion on the incredible work that our employees have undertaken, because it has been extraordinarily difficult. We did not get a guidebook or a manual for this particular crisis. So I don't think that's in dispute. It should not be in dispute. But here's the thing. Truth of the matter is that we have got to be very, very careful with every single dollar. And as Vice President Hucker pointed out, we had a session in public safety regarding the issues of drag racing and traffic issues, et cetera. And that point was made. And this is a public session. And so for those who think that we don't need to take a comprehensive look, here's an example of why it is critical to take a comprehensive look, because there is confusion, undoubtedly. And there is also some kind of, leeway in how to interpret what has been put forth as policies. So I do believe that an independent audit is necessary. Now, it will depend on the RFP and how it's structured, obviously, because we need to make sure that we're getting a return on investment. But I think that the unprecedented nature of what we are facing regarding not only the record number of special appropriations, but also this issue of differential pay, which, as it was mentioned before, may be north of $100 million, we need to understand and ensure that there is the capacity to manage this, that the policy directives are absolutely crystal clear, and that we don't have any other issues. So I just wanted to reiterate that, because big picture is also important. Let's not forget, we are probably already in the middle of the second wave of the pandemic. So I think this calls for us to be even more vigilant with regards to how we're going to spend our very scarce resources so that we can respond appropriately to what undoubtedly is going to be another wave of also relief efforts that we're going to have to undertake to make sure that our small businesses are not decimated and that people continue to access things like food assistance or rental assistance, et cetera. So no, I don't think we can dismiss this as just a simple mistake, and that it's not just that much money, and therefore we should not be looking into, broader audits. Absolutely not. I know I would not support that kind of attitude when we have been entrusted to safeguard our very scarce taxpayers' dollars. Thank you, Mr. President, for indulging me to just clarify those issues that I mentioned, as we begun. And of course, the GO committee, along with all my colleagues, will continue to look into these issues and ensure again that the council lead when it comes to ensuring and safeguarding our taxpayers' dollars.
Thank you. And I did want to, you said north of 100 million. I believe it's north of 100,000 in this case.
I'm talking about the reports that we have gotten regarding differential pay, the total amount.
Oh, total amount.
There have been projections that we may be facing perhaps $100 million or more by the end of the year. That's what I'm referring to.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. I don't want to mix the two together, though. This is a mistake, but it's not as large as the 100 million mistake. Councilmember Friedson, it is 11:52. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. A few questions for Ms. Lamarzi, based on some of the comments that were made earlier, and I think some confusion. I just want to clarify, and I could use your help here. Is there anything stopping the administration from conducting an internal review of their own policies before your report was public to determine if this was a problem elsewhere in county government?
No.
Is there anything that was stopping the administration, the county executive, or the chief administrative officer from informing the council before your review was made, before your report was made public?
You said law or regulation? No, it is just what I mentioned before. I think it was Councilmember Glass who asked me. We have a process that we follow, and the administration keeps confidential the information that we are reporting on, so that we can be sure that we have an accurate report that is presented to all interested parties.
Okay, according to your report and your office's determination, was this an unfortunate mistake, or was this a deliberate misapplication of county taxpayer funds, as you said earlier and as your report indicates?
It's our position that it was a deliberate decision, that we interviewed 4 of the 5, we interviewed all 5 chiefs, I clarify. And certainly they were afraid for their inspectors. They wanted to be sure that they were feeling valued, one said, and they made a decision as a group. It was not one person. And in fact, I think we point out that there is one division chief who was not party to that discussion or that decision, and his unit was properly applying county policy.
Thank you for that clarification. Mr. Malina, I appreciated your comments in the beginning of this hearing, apologizing for a written response that fell short of the seriousness that the situation requires. But I'm troubled subsequent to that you and others in the administration have taken a position that you don't agree with the Inspector General's report, that this was not a deliberate collective decision made by multiple senior employees within a particular department, that this merely was a misunderstanding, a misapplication of the rules that were set forth. We heard from the director that this was not deliberate, that this was about safety. And I'm just curious, what does improperly overpaying staff with taxpayer money have to do with safety? And I just don't understand that if following the rules that are set forth properly and that were clearly violated here, if that puts county employees at risk, it would beg the question of whether or not the rules that have been set forth by county government put employees at risk. That is the suggestion that has been made, and I think it's a really unfortunate and disappointing suggestion, and I think that it contradicts what I was appreciative of at the outset of the hearing. And you mentioned the punch to the gut, and I appreciate that, but it doesn't feel like the actions and the comments about this just being a mistake and disagreeing with the Inspector General's determinations reflect that. And I'm really concerned. And you mentioned earlier about the wishing that county employees had come to you or come to the county executive or to come to somebody else and not gone to the Inspector General. That this could have been avoided. And that is not what the Inspector General found here. I just want to be very clear. The Inspector General found that this was not a misunderstanding. This was not a mistake, that this was an intentional collective decision made by senior leadership. And they didn't go to higher ranking people in county government because the people who were higher ranking in county government were in on it, had decided on it. So, I just think we need to, clarify what, has happened here and what we're talking about here.
Can I just add one egregious misapplication of the county policy? What we were referring to is when this group of managers, along with the previous director, decided that for inspector, when they are writing the report at the office, other than using 8 hours, that 1 hour, 1.5 hour, or 2 hours, that whole term of nickel and diming, that was egregious misjudgment. So that is what we are referring to. We are not saying it didn't happen, but we are saying
they knew the rule and they decided not to follow the rule. And as a result, they paid taxpayer dollars out illegally and against county policy to people because they felt like it. That's what happened.
We are addressing that issue with those managers. And as I said at the beginning, unfortunately, individual personnel decisions are not subject for public matter. I believe.
Yeah, I'm not worried about that right now. For the time being, Mr. Matalino, I'm not speaking about the disciplinary actions that may or may not be taken. We'll wait to hear from you privately and appropriately and confidentially how that plays out. What I am talking about is the message that you are sending to whistleblowers, that you are sending to county employees who are working diligently to put themselves at risk, to follow the rules, to do everything that is asked of them, when you say that an intentional collective decision by management to violate policy and illegally spend taxpayer dollars is merely an unfortunate mistake, is about safety. These comments are just not helpful. That's the point that I was making. I don't have a question there, so I just will raise that. The other point that I will raise regarding the threshold question that was raised earlier about the outside independent review. I just want to point out that if we don't have a way to verify if taxpayer money is being spent properly and if fiscal policies are being followed adequately, it really begs the question of whether this differential pay program was set up appropriately. Financial controls that can't be tested are like metrics that can't be measured. They're completely worthless. And so I just want to be very clear about that. The idea that we can't audit this with an outside auditor because we don't have enough information to be able to determine whether it was done appropriately or not really raises much broader questions with the financial controls and the way that this program was set up from the outset. I'll ask my last question here. The OIG in the recommendations recommended that the CAO specifically review all county departments' differential pay expenditures. In the response, which you have adjusted here, which I appreciate, you originally had said that the departments would review themselves, which obviously begs a lot of issues since this was something that was born from independent or an individual department's management itself. You're now saying that the internal audit will do it and maybe an outside audit, which I think is much better. But it specifically referred to you. to the CAO. And I'm just wondering, what do you see as your role as Chief Administrative Officer in this? And what do you and the county executive see as the county executive's role in this?
I'm not going to speak for the county executive in this. I mean, the county executive is very clear. He is, I mean, in what he has said and what I said, he finds the situation unacceptable. He is disappointed to see that this happened. If you know, Councilmember Albano's brought up the punch to the gut, he feels the same way because he has lived and breathed the response to the coronavirus and watched the employees and interacted with our employees if they've gone out every day to continue the services that are so essential for our county government. Now, what we've tried to say in talking about what can and cannot be potentially proven through the record keeping that we have is the inspections within the Department of Permitting Services. So I want to be very clear that we weren't suggesting we do not have, and I don't think any one of us have suggested that we do not have the proper oversight to manage and certify the almost every dollar that we have spent out of the pay differential. We found one area where there was a mistake in judgment. What I tried to say is it was wrong. They will be held accountable. We will seek as the dollars that were overpaid, but at the same time, we have not seen a malicious intent. They did not benefit themselves from this decision. So that's why I'm just trying to walk, I think, a careful line about how we characterize the decisions that this management team made. They made it wrong. They interpreted it wrong. They should not have done it. It was in violation of our policies, and we will address that with all of them.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. I just think that you're walking a careful line, and you're on the other side of the report from the Office of the Inspector General, and that's a troubling side of the line to be on. And I would just close by saying I appreciate the fact that you don't want to speak for the county executive, but if you can't speak for the role that the county executive sees in this, then the county executive should be here to share that with with us himself. So I will just close with that. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. So where are we at this point? So at this point, Mr. Madaleno, you will be getting back to us as quickly as is humanly possible. You've heard time and time again, and I have not changed my opinion. I appreciate what Mrs. Lamarzi has said about an outside audit, but I sincerely believe that you don't necessarily do internal audits when there's the possibility that the group themselves has made the mistake. So as a group, so I believe we do need the outside audit. You've heard us loud and clear, but where are we, and how fast can you get back to us?
As far as on a formal basis, I mean, we are regathering later today to go over this, and between Ms. Kassiri, Mr. Broglie, and I trying to figure out what is the appropriate subject matter for an audit and how we would craft what we would be asking an outside auditor to do and what time frame that would require.
Okay, thank you. And with that, we're going to move on. We're running obviously very late today, but we're going to go to the council sitting as the Board of Health. What we're going to do is go to 4D, item 4D first, which is the introduction of the Board of Health regulation to adopt the Executive Order 12220 AM COVID-19 local order, amending and restating order dated September 29th, 2020. I'm going to ask Mr. Drummer to give us a background on that. Then we're going to go directly to the public hearing, and then we'll go finish our agenda as we can do. But we have people who are waiting to speak to us in a public hearing, and I'd like to hear from them as soon as we can. So with that, Mr. Drummer, would you like to give us a background on what we'll be discussing?
Okay, there we go.
As you know, last Thursday, the council reviewed an executive order 122-20, which would amend the existing COVID-19 local order. This order was made some changes that are described in the memo from last Thursday. The council deferred action on it, requested some changes from the executive. The executive sent an amended order to the council early this week, or I guess late last week. And the changes from the first order are described on page 5 of the memorandum. There's a change that would clarify that restaurants must stop selling alcohol for on-site consumption after 10, not takeout consumption. And that food sales, including drive-through and carry-out, can continue after 10 p.m. There was some confusion over that. And that the contact tracing required for restaurants was for contact tracing information from at least one person in each party of dine-in customers, and didn't include takeout customers. Also, there was some questions about playgrounds, and the playgrounds provision was changed to simply eliminate the requirement that playgrounds be cleaned or a notice being posted that they're not being cleaned. Simply remove them from the hourly cleaning requirements. And of course, the effective date was changed to today at 5 p.m., assuming the council approves it. Once again, the council, sitting as the county council, would need to approve the executive order. And if the council approves the executive order, then the council would have before it a resolution to adopt the executive order as a Board of Health regulation that would take effect throughout the county, including within municipalities, and become a local law that's subject to county enforcement. The executive order is derived from the governor's executive order, authorizing local governments to provide stricter constraints to slow down or stop the spread of COVID-19. And that's all addressed in the packet. And if you'd like, I can go through a summary of the actual order in front of you, but it's basically the same as last Thursday with the changes I just described. And whatever your pleasure is.
Do you feel it is necessary to go through to meet the criteria? We all are aware of what the executive order said, but for the public hearing process, do you believe we need to go through it in more in depth?
No, I don't think so. I think we've already gone through it once. It's been posted, since Friday night on the web. Exactly what the order is. It's in the packet in front of you and has been advertised for the public hearing. So I believe it's clear what it does, and the packet explains as a summary of those provisions on page 4 or page 3 of the packet, page 3 and 4 of the packet, which summarizes it.
Okay, thank you. Then we're going to go directly to the public hearing. This is a public hearing on a Board of Health regulation to adopt Executive Order 122-20 AM COVID-19 local order, amending and restating order dated September 29th, 2020. Action is scheduled immediately following this hearing. Each individual will have 2 minutes to speak. Individuals will be alerted as they approach their 2 minutes and may be disconnected. Also, there may be technical glitches during the public hearing that may need to be addressed by our staff. So thanks in advance for your patience. Susan Kennedy, hopefully you are on the call, though I don't know.
I am here.
There you are. Okay. Yes, I see you now.
I
understand there are speakers for this, so if you will please call on the speakers.
Yes, our first speaker for this public hearing is Tom Reuter. Mr. Reuter, you have 2 minutes to give us your testimony. You may begin.
Thank you for your time. I'm here to encourage you to seek a balanced and nuanced approach going forward as our COVID count increases. One size does not fit all, and a 25% mandate across the board would drastically hurt our 200 plus small business owners, making them no more safe while creating undue financial turmoil and emotionally punishing responsible COVID actors. Let me explain. My name's Tom Reuter. I'm a lifetime Montgomery County resident. I'm a lifetime Montgomery County resident. I own and operate a chain of salon and spa businesses. I represent over 200 licensed cosmetologists, estheticians, and staff. Our salon professionals are all independently owned. Let me tell you about what we've accomplished without any government direction. Starting on January 28th, 2020, we held our first internal Corona Task Force meeting. Today, we call it Safe and Clean Protocol, or S&C for short. Given the shortness of my time, I'm going to explain just a few highlights. All individuals must be pre-certified prior to working at any of our locations. In-person course, final test, written certificate that must be displayed. Our physical setup, we have a 9,000-foot facilities that have single lockable studios. When originally constructed, we had an outside air exhaust system, a very expensive exhaust system that has a variable fan control. From a cosmetology standpoint, that system's like an 11, and only a 3 was needed from code. Coincidentally, unfortunately, today we can turn it up high and bring in a lot of outside air, making it almost hard to open the front door, and that's really good for COVID prevention. Our front desk staff works 80 hours a week. I'm unaware of any of our competitors that has invested in any staffing. That's unique and expensive for our business. It allows us to properly implement our S&C. Our stylists have really cut back their business to comply with our mandates. We've given PPE. We've actually experienced over 7 known cases that have come in our front door. Once aware, we need contact tracing.
Mr. Reuter, my apologies. Your time is up.
I would like the respect of the council just to continue a few more moments.
That will be the council president's call.
What is a few moments, Mr. Reuter?
Maybe a minute, not much more.
We will give you 1 more minute.
Thank you. We've had many cases that have come in our front door. We've contact traced, we've tested, we've had no expansion of those cases. In conclusion, I'm going to state all this stuff positively. I agree that COVID's a real problem. Please continue your grants. They're valuable and important. Thank you. Please reward our 200 stylists that are proactively restricting our commerce while implementing safe and clean beyond government mandates, but customized to our business model. Please use our safe and clean to promote safe commerce to other businesses, right? I ask that you help educate and lead. Please create a nuanced position and not a blanket mandate. Reward COVID responsible businesses. Involve partners with your small businesses to develop protocols specific to their business model. People are fearful out there. I have 200 individuals' lives that I'm responsible for, and one size does not fit all. From my perspective, you will lose those individuals that believe in your cause, but not your decisions.
Mr. Reuter.
These individuals are hurting financially.
Mr. Reuter, that's 1 minute. Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Peter Gajewski. Mr. Gajewski, I am so sorry if I've mispronounced your name. You may unmute and begin your testimony.
Hello, I have about 2.5 minutes. I hope you'll indulge me. I'm Peter Gajewski, Music Director of the National Philharmonic at Strathmore. Some of you surely recall that a year ago, National Philharmonic had a financial near-death experience. I'm happy to report that is all behind us now. And for the 2021 season, NatPhil is appearing twice per month from Strathmore on Washington's PBS television station WETA Channel 26, and is also streamed into retirement communities and online for free viewing. I do want to underline that these concerts are performed with no live audience whatsoever, zero. National Philharmonic has pared down its presentations to fit under the 50-person limit, which includes our union musicians and production crew. Doing this with a proposed 25-person limit would be impossible. Working with medical professionals, the Philharmonic has developed extraordinary protocols to ensure a safe working environment for all. The concerts are filmed at Strathmore, designed with state-of-the-art ventilation for 2,000 plus. With our crew of 50, we utilize only 2.5% of this capacity. All workers have their temperature taken on entry and fill out screening questionnaires. There's enforced distancing of at least 6 feet at all times. NP is even making use of all available toilets with individual assignments to avoid any possibility of close interaction between workers. All workers are also assigned large personal areas. Of course, masking is strictly enforced. Our next production is scheduled to tape on November 17th, a week from today. Today we have 2 requests. First, that the new rules that the council is considering include a grandfathering of this November 17 production with the strict medical protocols that are being enforced. And second and final, that the county medical professionals work with the National Philharmonic to find a way forward for future productions that will allow the workers involved to continue to make wages in a safe environment rather than be forced to file for unemployment. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. I did want to note that the council, what is before the council is either we vote for the executive order as it is written, or we vote against it. We cannot in any way change the executive order. We can ask that it be changed for a future executive order, but we either vote for this or against this.
Is there a possibility of an exception?
There's no exceptions from us. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Kennedy, please.
Yes, our next speaker is Roni. Roni, if you could please give us your last name as well and begin your testimony.
Hi, I'm Roni Garrett. Both me and my fiance Kayla Kaplan were planning a wedding in Montgomery County for the 29th. We had planned on, we were looking at various venues in various jurisdictions, and we specifically chose to have it in Montgomery County due to the restrictions that we felt were very responsible. We were, we looked at, places of Virginia, didn't feel like that was, we felt like Montgomery County was taking coronavirus very seriously, and we liked that. We talked with the Montgomery County Parks, who operates the venue, and they were taking extra precautions, which we felt very comfortable with. We wanted to be safe, so we are having we were planning the attendance to be significantly below the 50-person limit, and I think we were planning to go over above the 6 feet distancing and various other, and having everyone be masked. We have invested a significant amount of money in terms of planning a wedding. Obviously, we understood that something like this could happen. However, we are taking significant precautions over and above what the county previously said, and we felt that those were significant and important. And we were planning on complying on those, and we were relying on the county to provide clear communication of what the policies were and what changes would possibly be made. Giving less than 1 month's notice puts significant burden on us that we're going to have to move the venue within 20 days, where we've been planning for significant amount of time.
My apologies, sir. Your time is up. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Ada Vitorotto.
Vitorotto.
Ada, are you there? You may unmute and begin your testimony.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Hi, my name is Ada Villatoro, and I'm the owner of Gulfport Restaurant. I don't have anything written down. I just want to ask our council members to please consider this new COVID-19 restriction. We are struggling in Long Branch, where my restaurant is, and having it at 50%, we are comfortable with right now. And I will like for you to keep it at 50% capacity for now, if you can, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to check and see if we have Tina Mabaza on the line. Ms. Mabaza, are you there? I don't believe so. So, Mr. President, that wraps up our speakers for this public hearing.
Thank you very much. We will close the public hearing, and I'm going to need a motion let me go first. We're going to close the public hearing, and let me ask Councilmember Rice to speak, please.
Well, just very quickly, Mr. President, it's very interesting that the first speaker we had at our public hearing was representing salon owners. As everyone knows, my wife owns a salon in downtown Bethesda. I remember when she was closed and the impact that our restrictions have on her business and other businesses. It certainly is something that is serious, but it's something that needs to be done for the protection of all residents. And then it's just very interesting in terms of happenstance. My sister-in-law is actually scheduled to get married next weekend. And she just texted me probably about an hour ago and asked me, Craig, would you be able to attend if we move the wedding to next Saturday, because they're having to change venues because of the change. This is affecting all of us. And it's just very interesting that it's affecting me directly as an individual council member. But I just want to assure folks that we are not taking these decisions lightly. As for everyone else who's here on the council, and I don't want to speak for them, but I can tell you that regardless of whether they have these own situations in their own personal lives or not, that they take this very heavily in terms of the decisions that we have to make. But it is for the utmost safety of all of our residents and the employees of businesses, as well as the businesses and the patrons. And I know this is life-changing. I know it has huge implications. I've seen it when my uncle passed away and I couldn't attend his funeral. There are tremendous things that are happening. We know, we get it. And we're very sad that these have impacts on your lives. But keep in mind that we are leading this effort because we want to try and continue to keep people safe. COVID is at an all-time high here in this country. It's at one of its all-time highs here in Montgomery County in the state of Maryland. And so from that perspective, we really have to act now. And so I just really want to thank folks for testifying. It is not easy, but understand that we do hear you and we're experiencing the same things as well. But understand that this is very difficult, but we feel as though it's something that has to be done. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you. Just to clarify, we are now going to vote on this this ordinance, right? This is the moment for any comments about this additional closing. I just wanted to say, you know, this is the first step of a continuum, and the most drastic step is a stay-at-home order. I think everyone will remember what it was like under a stay-at-home order from February or March, I guess it was, into nearly June. It was very severe. And we need the state to step up and provide leadership, not only for Maryland, but for the whole region. We need all the states and the DC to step up, because a local jurisdiction implementing its own stay-at-home order is a very severe measure to take in the absence of other jurisdictions doing the same thing. And it puts us in a very difficult posture, but there's no question that this is one of the times where we are now in a phase where the virus is more present when you go out, when you leave your home, wherever you are. There is a much higher likelihood now that that virus is somewhere than it has been in a long time. And that's why the cases are rising so much. So this is a very perilous phase of the virus. And at the same time, there's real questions as to whether the leadership that we saw from, for example, Governor Hogan, who was a national leader, implementing the initial stay-at-home order. I think Governor Hogan made a huge difference at the outset of this pandemic. But we need him again. We need him to work with the governor of Virginia, with the mayor of DC, and identify a regional strategy for the phase that we are now heading into, which is, again, a phase of very high transmission. So I am supporting this measure, but I also just want to say we are not an island. We cannot do this all on our own, and we have to have more collaboration with our partner jurisdictions. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Albornoz.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll be brief. I was going to speak later, but within this context, I'll just underscore 2 points which were made at our session last Thursday. One, and we all agree, regional approach so important, and so I'll wait on my questions when we get to the briefing on where that stands. But the 2 weddings that were just mentioned, they're still going to happen. They're just not going to happen here. And in jurisdictions that may have less restrictions, and so that's why the regional approach, to Councilmember Reamer's point, and the one that's been made repeatedly by all of us, including the county executive, is so critically important. We have to take this step. It's critically important. The numbers are stark and sobering, but it's really important that everyone else step up across the region. And then secondly, I do think that, and I want to give a lot of credit to Dr. Stoddard and Dr. Gales, that these executive orders are firm and provide very clear guidance. But there have been numerous instances in which, using reasonable as their barometer, the public health and safety and emergency management team have looked on a case-by-case basis as necessary to make adjustments in specific circumstances with unique circumstances, one of which may have been mentioned just in the testimony today. So this executive order, as the council president said, is an up or down vote. But the day-to-day function and back and forth that continues to happen with the administration, I think we've learned a lot of lessons that continue to be applied. And so I just would encourage those businesses and organizations that are impacted to continue to dialogue as they have been, either through their associations or individually, because it's helpful. And I have really appreciated the flexibility the team has shown in certain instances to accommodate unique circumstances. So with that, I yield back to you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Vice President Hucker.
Thank you, Mr. President. Sorry, I'm cleaning up my remarks here because I wanted to ask some of the questions. I guess I will during the briefing. I've received so many emails and calls and texts about this proposed order, much more than any other order that we've had in front of us. There was a lot of confusion initially about what's in it. I think there still is. I'm grateful to you, Mr. President, for allowing the public some more opportunity to digest it and to provide testimony. I think we really have to redouble our efforts to keep the community and all of our business stakeholders in particular in the loop about our intentions. It's, as everyone said, the data are very clear that our cases are on the rise, not just here, but across the country and certainly in the region. And we can't take more chances. But it's also clear that there are significant trade-offs to the proposal, given that we know our small businesses are the backbone of our economy, and they really, I feel like we have a long way to go to make sure that they're not the ones taking it on the chin. I really think I'd like to see stronger leadership from the governor in terms of a more generous package. We, this council and the comptroller, asked for $500 million. It took us months to get $250 million. There needs to be, I think, from the federal government and the state government, a much more vigorous robust package of funding, so that if we're going to close them, they're not going to go out of business. They're able to stay in business and pay their rent and pay their employees. But we haven't quite seen that at the level we need to see. I also, I guess I'll reserve my questions, Mr. President, for the briefing, but I'm concerned about the disparity here because treating basically large national chains, big box stores and grocers the same as small independent restaurants and retail stores. And I'm concerned that we have cited a number of restaurants using our existing authority, but I'd like to know more about how much we are focusing our inspectors on large big box stores and grocers that I at least frequently see not maintaining any customer count, not wiping down carts and providing hand sanitizer like a lot of restaurants. And they're all entirely inside, unlike many of our restaurants that have large outdoor patios. I was also surprised, given what we heard last Friday, that to read that DC doesn't have any plans for new restrictions and Prince George's is not going forward with the proposal to add new restrictions there. I feel like we're very much between a rock and a hard place. We have no choice but to put public health over our economic concerns, but we need far more support, in my view, from the state and the federal government for our small businesses. And in our administration of this, I would really like us to make sure we're focusing our inspectors on protecting public health in large chain stores and grocers, and making sure that they are bearing their share of the burden, not just our small independent restaurants. The way it's written, I don't quite understand why 26 customers outside is viewed as unsafe, but 150 customers inside a average grocery store is not seen as unsafe. But that's what's allowed, as I understand it, under this executive order. So I'll go along with it. I'll ask more questions during the briefing, but I really hope before we have additional restrictions, we have a better coordination with our regional partners, because we can't solve this problem alone. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Mr. President. I too will support this measure, though I'm very concerned about and really sobering to hear the testimony of some of our great local small businesses that this is going to have a significant impact. And we know that, but we have to prioritize public health. I mean, just for the residents and for the benefit of the public, and we'll hear this more, I'm sure, in our briefing. Look, the virus is increasing dramatically here in the region. I think, we've almost doubled in the region, DC, Maryland, Virginia, a 7th consecutive day of a record high of cases, 2,833 over the last 7-day rolling average. That's more than double what we saw October 1, which was 1,313 in just about a month. So this is serious. Baltimore City has taken action. Anne Arundel is going to take, about to take action. We'll see what our colleagues in Prince George's and DC do. We're going to have a press conference from the governor at 5 p.m. today, hopefully to say a lot more than he did last time of this is serious, but personal responsibility. I was disappointed in that. He's not communicating with regional health officials. He's not communicating. His health department, rather, isn't communicating with regional health officials about what he's going to do. We have no idea. He's going to speak at 5 p.m. We hope he does something and moves us back into a statewide order where you can try to control and have that collaboration that my colleagues and I have been talking about. He hasn't been speaking with the county executives. I think that's a dereliction of duty from Governor Hogan. And it makes our job hard. You heard from some of these businesses about how impacted they're going to be, but we have to make the best decision in a very unfortunate situation while the virus continues to increase and our caseloads go over 200 a day consistently and our rolling averages increase in the region. So, it's not a good situation to be in, but I think we have to do this. Obviously, we want the virus to be at bay. There is some good news on the horizon with the virus, with the vaccines. I read a report this morning that we might be able to have first vaccinations start to be distributed even by middle of December. I hope that happens. We'll see what happens. I know there are going to be applications for emergency approval from the FDA. But that's a long time. A month and a half. We've seen significant spread earlier on, so we need to take this action now. My hope is that we'll do it in a regional way so that we can stop the increase, and then we can approach this with more federal state money to support those businesses. I agree with Councilmember Hucker's point on that, and that others have made, and then have a vaccine and hopefully start turning the corner. But step up, Governor. That's my message. And to our businesses, I'm sorry you're dealing with this, but we're going to do the best we can. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you, Mr. President. There is no doubt that one of the biggest challenges that the local governments have faced since the beginning of this pandemic in March has been the absolute absence of any guidance from the federal government and a comprehensive guidance from our state officials as well, namely the governor. And as the largest jurisdiction, this has been such a difficult thing because we have had to kind of scramble using data to put forth particular directives to safeguard the health of our residents. And I think that is why, luckily, we didn't see, for example, our hospitals completely overrun. I think that is why you saw that some of the directives, for example, for the use of masks, were actually very important in ensuring that we could, control the situation. And I thank our residents for being, so responsible and really caring for their neighbors and their families in this way. But unfortunately, we're not immune to this second wave that we're already seeing across the country. And when you see reports of the United States hitting the largest numbers of cases since the pandemic began, that really is sobering on so many levels. So I also am very concerned that we have to take these actions because of what we just heard, not only in this testimony, but all the emails, all the conversations that we have, all the gatherings that we're not able to attend, special significant milestones that we have had to miss. And I keep saying that in March, we thought that by June, we would be back to some normalcy. Obviously, that's not the case. It wasn't the case, and it's not going to be the case until hopefully we're able to turn the page with an administration at the national level that everybody can begin to trust and that can begin to put forth particular national measures that our states then can utilize for us to get control and get a handle on this pandemic. If we keep acting as if these are not significant moments and milestones, the economic impact will just be a lot worse. And it will take us so much longer to even try to get back to some sense of normalcy. So I personally don't enjoy having to make this decision. But I do want to recognize that both Dr. Gills and Dr. Starter, as it was mentioned earlier, they have had the ability also to respond to particular instances where there may be nuances or significant differences. And I'm sure they will continue to do that as applicable. But we have to make this decision. And again, yes, hopefully vaccines, the good news that it's on the horizon, hopefully that will be something that we can look forward to. But, our national experts have said that we have to be cautious. And not to mention, of course, flu season and having to go indoors very soon, even though we've been able to enjoy this beautiful weather. The forecast is that we're going to go back to cold weather, indoor, having to go indoors. So I will support this. I want to also state that, yes, making sure that we are focused, that the communication is very, very robust, that we don't have to do this back and forth of having to correct things is really critical. We've said it from the beginning, information is key. And to the extent also that we'll have to do whatever we can to push the federal government, the state government, to provide more relief, that is going to be key because we may have to now start looking at our own relief efforts once again so that we don't decimate our small businesses and we continue to provide the support that our residents need. So with that, thank you, Mr. President, and I want to thank Dr. Stoddard and Dr. Gills for what they continue to do during this very difficult moments. Thank you.
Thank you. I too want to thank Dr. Stoddard and Dr. Gales and everyone else associated with this. We have a couple other council members that want to speak as well, but I was going to jump in. You know, I am going to support this, but the fact that we have to, it's pass fail. Either you vote for it or you vote against it. And I am concerned about parts of it, but I am going to vote for it in general. But I'm also concerned for our small businesses. To Councilmember Albanaz's point, this really does need to be regional, and not just Councilmember Albanaz, many others have said it as well. This really needs to be regional. If someone is not allowed to go to a restaurant in Montgomery County, but goes to one in Prince George's or the district or Frederick or wherever our borders are, and they come back to Montgomery County, we have really not done anything other than create a hardship for that business where they didn't go to. We didn't stop the COVID from being in Montgomery County if that's how they were getting it. So I am very concerned. I believe that we need to be doing this on a regional basis. Perhaps with the governor's announcement today, perhaps Prince George's announcement today, we'll start to see more of a regional point. To Vice President Hucker's concern about the big box stores, I am a small business person at heart. I absolutely support small businesses, but I also have to say that we have to be careful when we talk just about the big box stores. In some cases, they are the suppliers for small businesses. You can go into to a Home Depot or wherever, and you see smaller contractors purchasing their goods so that they can stay in business. You go into other places, you see restaurants that are purchasing goods so that they can be in business for that day. I see it all, quite often. So we have to be careful about why only being concerned about a type of business. We have to figure out what else that business services. I do think that what we hopefully will see that there will be a national remedy on this as well, not just for the vaccine, which obviously is very needed and hopefully is around the corner for us, but we also need a national remedy. If we are saying, look what's happening regionally, and it's not being successful for us, we need to look at how things are being done in a national way. And I believe that perhaps with a change of administration, that there could be relief in sight for that as well. And with that, Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you, Council President. And I just want to echo other comments that have been made. We're in an impossible situation here. I've raised this concern before. It has never made me comfortable, nor I think is a particularly good process for the council to vote on something that we have no ability to amend and that we had no formal role in developing. That's not Dr. Gales or Dr. Stoddard's fault, but that is the reality that we find ourselves, and I don't think that it is a particularly good process, and we find ourselves in it once again. I do have some concerns with what is in here. I understand the approach of basically a general suppression strategy, as was shared in our questions last week, based on what we all recognize are alarming numbers. I mean, there's just no disagreement there whatsoever, and there are no good answers. And I'm not questioning the approach in that way, because there is not a good way to do this. This is an impossible position that we're all in. I do have some continued questions, as Councilmember Hucker noted, and as I had raised before, about the difference between indoor and outdoor and the size of gatherings, and not fully understanding where that breakdown, or why there isn't a separation between those two activities when we know one is more dangerous than the other. I also have some concerns in particular about the situation that we find ourselves, where basically, based on what we heard last week, we don't have an indication that the particular businesses are are the issue or the problem here, as Dr. Stoddard mentioned in our hearing last week. It's really more informal, casual, family and friend gatherings that are creating so much of the issue, and yet we're shutting down or restricting certain businesses, which is a challenge. But I also understand that all of these activities, as we have heard repeatedly, are inherently more dangerous based on the numbers as they currently are, which is what we've heard consistently from our public health officials, and which I can understand. And so it does create a big challenge. I happen to believe and have always believed that I know there's been an attempt to have a regional strategy. I really think that we need a regional strategy, that we must have a regional strategy, that none of this is going to work in the absence of a regional strategy. And I am not sure how to move forward. I do think that, the reality is, and I think we have to understand and appreciate it, that it's not just people who aren't going to be able to have their weddings in the way that they were accustomed. They're going to do them elsewhere. But the businesses here are going to close. People are going to lose their jobs. And there are going to be long-lasting impacts of that. So it's a really difficult situation. It's one that has eaten me up in all the conversations that I have had. I know all of my colleagues have had as well. We don't have an option to make changes or amend, so we have to vote up or down. And I'm sure we will approve this today, but we're going to have to continue to monitor this. And I am hopeful that that as we move forward, that we actually get the regional participation and cooperation. And that's not Dr. Gales or Dr. Stoddard. That's really County Executive Elrich, who needs to lead that effort, because in the absence of that regional strategy and the absence of a regional approach, nothing that we do here is going to be able to make the impact that we need it to be to keep folks safe. And we're going to pay other consequences as a result.
Thank you. Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate all the comments from my colleagues, and while they were all sharing concerns for the businesses and for the health of our residents, I went to the dashboard, and on November 6th, our 7-day rolling average of cases went from high to very high, rates which we have not experienced since June. And those were the sustained rates from April through June, when we last remember the height of this pandemic. And then also another statistic on November 7th, the percentage of hospital beds that are occupied by patients with COVID is now in the high category. So when we talk about these policies, I look at them based on the data and based on the science and how we best keep our residents healthy and safe. And as has been mentioned, I'm optimistic about Pfizer's announcement for a drug, a vaccine to keep everybody safe. And I'm equally as optimistic about the efforts by our President-elect Joe Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, who have already put together a COVID-19 advisory board filled with the best and brightest of our country. And so all of these actions and steps in unison, I hope will mean that relief is on the way, but we have to do what we have to do based on the data and the science, and the dashboard is clear about where this is going in our community. And yes, we do need to have a regional approach as well. So with some level of reluctance, as many of my colleagues have shared, I will be supporting this to keep our residents healthy and safe.
Thank you. Council Vice President Hucker, you wanted to add something?
Well, only just to clarify my earlier comment, since you had commented on it, Mr. President, no one wants to pick on any of our businesses. I'm grateful to all our businesses for being in Montgomery County. My point is, I see a great variation in big box stores in particular. There's no question they provide essential support for many of our small businesses. You're absolutely right. what I see is many of them you go to, well, I should say, I want to thank Trader Joe's and Whole Foods that we probably go to every week for counting customers, having a line outside because when the customer count is above the recommendation, wiping down the carts, enforcing their masking, and providing sanitizer before you can even walk in the building. I've never been in a Giant or a Safeway or a Home Depot that follows those practices. And my understanding, what I've learned in all these great briefings, is that those are our best practices. They have the resources to do that. They should be counting the customers and keeping excessive customers outside. I haven't seen them doing it. And if we're going to spread the pain around to, if we're going to make our small businesses, independent family-owned restaurants and retail bear so much of the pain from this, I really think we need to be doing the same thing for our big box stores as well. That was my point.
Thank you. Okay. So with that, we're going to have to figure out where we are right now. We have before us the public hearing, and the public hearing has now been closed. We will need to vote on the introduction and then the action on the county council sitting as the county council, and then vote as the council sitting as the Board of Health. We need to do both of those, and then we'll need to go back to hear an update from Dr. Gales and Dr. Stoddard as the council sitting as the Board of Health for our weekly update. So the question is, it's now 12, it's almost 1 o'clock, and we have public hearings that are supposed to start at 1:30. We're going to have to take a recess at some point, so we're going to start our public hearings later. But let me ask Dr. Gales and Dr. Stoddard, do you have any time other than now to give us an update for today?
I would have a window between 3:15 and 4 o'clock.
3:15 and 4 o'clock. Dr. Stoddard, does that fit into your, I'm sure you have nothing on your schedule at all today, do you?
I'm looking at my calendar to verify, but 3:15 to 4 o'clock. Frankly, 3 to 4 o'clock are open for me. Well, I can even give you a little more time than Dr. Gales.
Okay.
They're that important to me, so.
Okay, well then let me ask my colleagues, if we voted on this now, have a recess, do the public hearings when we come back at whatever it is, whatever time we can do it, 1:30, 1:45, however that works. Actually, we could probably still do it at 1:30. And then, regardless of what we're doing, because Dr. Gales and Dr. Stoddard are kind enough to fit us in their schedule, regardless of what we're doing, we'll put a bookmark in what we're doing this afternoon and then hear from them and then go back to where we're bookmarking. Does that meet with everybody's approval? I haven't seen anybody jumping up and down, so that's good. Okay, so with that, we are going to 4.5 on our agenda, which is the introduction of the resolution to approve an executive order 12220 AM COVID-19 local order amending and restating order dated September 29th, 2020 as the county council. We need a motion for that. Is there a motion?
So moved.
It's been moved by Councilmember Rice. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Reamer. Mr. Drummer, just make certain I'm right. This one is a hand vote. The next one is a voice, is a roll call, right?
Right. You're now sitting as the county council voting on this resolution, and it's a hand vote.
Okay. All those in favor? The motion was made by Councilmember Rice, seconded by Councilmember Reamer. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. And we see everybody reluctantly raising their hand. Okay. So that passes unanimously. Now we're going to be sitting as the Board of Health. This is an action, the resolution to adopt an executive order 122-20 AM COVID-19 local order amending and restating order dated September 29th, 2020 as a Board of Health regulation. That is a roll call vote. So Madam Clerk, if you could please call the roll.
Mr. Glass?
Yes.
Mr. Glass votes yes. Mr. Jawando?
Yes.
Mr. Jawando votes yes. Mr. Reamer?
Yes.
Mr. Reamer votes yes. Ms. Navarro?
Yes.
Ms. Navarro votes yes. Mr. Albonos?
Yes.
Mr. Albornoz votes yes. Mr. Rice?
Yes.
Mr. Rice votes yes. Mr. Friedson?
Yes.
Mr. Friedson votes yes. Mr. Hucker?
Yes.
Mr. Hucker votes yes. And Mr. Katz?
Yes, so that carries unanimously. So what we're going to do, and just as another aside, because I'm going to be thoroughly confusing to everybody today, at the end of the day, after everything is over, before we adjourn, we will go back to the consent calendar and vote on the consent calendar. But we won't tie up any other time frame with that. That'll be the last thing that we do. So with that, we are in recess. I believe we can come back at 1:30 and start the public hearings. And as many of you know, it's not only the 7 public hearings that we have this afternoon. There's a few other issues that we'll be discussing as well. So with that, we are on recess until 1:30. Thank you all very much.
Or an organization that they connect with now, and so we're always looking for more ways to expand that connection so that you can make people aware of what's out there. Because it's as part of the county's racial equity initiative, we do also want to make sure